Chapter 138. In Ning Wang Fu, in a certain room, Steward Wang looked at a stack of account books in front of him. Worry appeared on his chubby face. As the steward that was responsible for managing the outside businesses of the Wang Fu, he had the habit of thoroughly checking the accounts every month. This way, he could understand the income of the Wang Fu every month. Compared to previous years, it had increased or decreased, and where the reason was. If the income decreased by too much, it would be hard for him to explain it to his superiors. And this was the problem he was currently worrying about. It was almost the end of the year. Even if he added up all of the profits of the Wang Fu's outside businesses, it would only be half of what it was last year. 2 months later, it would only be 70% of what it was last year. That would be his negligence. If Wang Yi blamed him, he would most likely not be able to keep his position as the steward. Luckily, the Rui Du and Spirit Wine Factory had already started operations. The shops in the city would officially open tomorrow. These two businesses were his greatest hopes. But he wasn't sure how much profit he would be able to make. What if? Steward Wang felt uneasy. Just as he was feeling vexed, the door was suddenly pushed open by someone. A brat about 10 years old ran in. The brat's little face was still slightly immature, but it was 70 to 80% similar to Steward Wang. Especially his round body and round face. He ran in front of Steward Wang and stretched out a chubby little hand. He said, "Daddy, give me a few copper coins, I want to buy candied haws to eat." Steward Wang was feeling vexed when he suddenly saw the brat's round face. A nameless fire rose in his heart and he scolded, "Eat, eat, eat, all you know is to eat. Look at what you've eaten." The brat was still thinking about going out later to try the sugar snowball that Lucifer's candied haws had released a few days ago. He had heard a few of his friends say that the sugar snowball tasted even better than the candied haws. He impatiently ran in to ask his father for money and was scolded for no reason. He froze where he was. "Have you memorized all the lessons that teacher taught you?" Seeing the brat standing there in a daze, housekeeper Wang became even angrier and asked with a straight face. He was not cut out for studying, and only managed to pass the elementary scholar exam. After that, he suffered many setbacks, and eventually found a job in the prince's mansion. Over the past 10 years, he had worked his way up to where he was today. Although the other high scholars did not live as well as he did, but studying was the right thing to do. He wanted to hand over his unfulfilled dream to his son, but who would have thought that this brat had no interest in studying, and would never forget to eat. He was really his biological son. "Yes, I can." The naughty brat still had some eyesight. He knew that he couldn't provoke his father right now, so he stuttered. "Recite it for me." He didn't know what was wrong with his father today. Why did he suddenly want to test him on his homework? The devilish brat rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, he had memorized those convoluted words yesterday. He immediately recited them. Although he stumbled, he didn't make any mistakes. After listening to the naughty child recite it, housekeeper Wang's expression finally became a little better. However, he had some doubts in his heart. In the past, when he was tested on his homework, this brat had never been able to completely recite it. What was going on this time? Was he bewitched? He originally thought that if he couldn't recite it, he would reprimand him, warning him to study hard and not to only think about playing and eating all day. He didn't expect the naughty brat to perform so well. The reprimand that he had prepared immediately became useless. His good plan was interrupted, and housekeeper Wang's face became serious again. He casually pulled over a piece of white paper, picked up a pen, and wrote a few lines on it. He handed it to the naughty brat and said, "There is no end to learning. Don't be arrogant and complacent. Go and memorize these lines. I'll check them at night." A few days ago, when they were on the mountain, the female teacher made the group of children recite these lines. Housekeeper Wang's ears almost grew calluses from listening to them that day, so he inadvertently memorized those lines. At this time, he could use these lines to send the naughty brat away. At least before he could memorize them, he wouldn't bother him. Go, go. Housekeeper Wang waved his hand and said impatiently. The naughty brat took the paper and walked out of the room in a daze. His 10-year-old brain still couldn't completely understand why he didn't receive a reward when he had clearly memorized them, but a punishment for continuing to memorize. The naughty brat, who had been tricked by his father, sat under the eaves of the side room with a lifeless expression. He raised his head and looked at the sky, revealing an expression of despair. After a long time, the naughty brat let out a long sigh and raised the paper in his hand. Having attended a private school for a few years, he could already recognize quite a few words. Soon, a voice sounded from under the eaves. The rules of a disciple, the teachings of a saint, are first filial piety, then trustworthiness. Love the masses, be close to the people, and if you have the strength to spare, learn literature. Sigh. The voice was clear and lively like a child's, yet it was mixed with sighs. It was a bit out of place with the atmosphere at this time. At the same time, a middle-aged man with a dignified expression walked out of Prince Ning's study. He rubbed the space between his brows. The cold autumn wind blew past, and it actually made him much more clear-headed. Sir Prefect, shall I escort you back? An old man wearing the robes of a housekeeper walked over and said respectfully. The middle-aged man waved his hand and said, "There's no need. I know the roads and the manor. You can walk back yourself." Hearing this, the old man didn't insist. He watched the middle-aged man's figure disappear before turning to leave. At this time, the middle-aged man walking in the manor had a worried expression on his face. As the prefect of Qing and Fu, he was in charge of all matters in the manor. In another 2 months, he would return to the capital to report on his duties. At that time, the court would conduct an examination of his achievements, including this year's situation with regards to Qing and Fu's population, land clearing, tax collection, food, public security, education, and other aspects. He would be promoted, punished, and rewarded accordingly. He wasn't worried about farming and collecting taxes, but he was worried about the education of the people. The students of Qing and Fu had not performed well in this year's examinations. The number of imperial examinations they had received was far less than in previous years. This way, his achievements in education would be greatly reduced. But the work of education could not be accomplished in a day. Although improvements in other areas could completely cover up the lack of education, it was still somewhat embarrassing. After all, Qing and Fu was the largest city in the Jing kingdom other than the capital. The number of students was also second only to the capital. In previous years, the number of students who passed the examinations was enough to compete with the capital, but this time, they were left far behind. As he was thinking about this matter, he suddenly heard a child's voice when he passed by a certain room. The rules of the disciples, the teachings of the saints, the first is filial piety, the second is honesty. Sigh, love the masses, be close to the people, and have the strength to spare, learn literature. Tang Shuecho, sigh. Chapter 139. The rules of a disciple, the teachings of a saint, the first is filial piety, the second is trust. Tang Shuecho. The middle-aged man stopped walking and carefully listened to the contents of the child's recitation. A trace of doubt appeared on his face. These 3 sentences were easy to recite, and although the words were easy to understand, if one listened carefully, it seemed to have the effect of enlightenment. It was very suitable for teaching children. There were similar teachings in the Mongolian language, but they were relatively obscure. It was rare to see such a simple and easy to understand one. Furthermore, he had never heard of the text that the child was reciting. Also, what was that Tang Shuecho? After standing outside the courtyard and listening for a while, the child repeated the same few sentences. The middle-aged man had already thought of a few things. A trace of eagerness appeared on his face as he walked in with large strides. The devilish child held the paper in his hands and carried it back and forth. The only words he repeated were, "Tang shuecho." He was drooling when he heard footsteps. When he raised his head, he saw a stranger walk into the courtyard. The devilish child looked at him in a daze and a trace of caution appeared on his face. "Little child, what text did you recite just now?" Magistrate Dong walked in front of the devilish child and asked in a pleasant manner. His father had said that the people living in the Wangfu were all nobles. He was to only play in this area and not to bump into others. He stared blankly at the stranger in front of him and didn't reply. He obediently handed over the paper in his hands. Magistrate Dong took the piece of paper from the naughty child's hands and discovered that there were only a few sentences written on it. After he finished reading the contents of the few lines, his eyes brightened and he asked somewhat urgently, "Do you know who wrote this?" Housekeeper Wang was still in the room checking the accounts when the door was pushed open again. He raised his head and saw the devilish child's head poking in again. When he lowered his head again, he suddenly forgot where he had been calculating. A trace of anger appeared on his face as he glared at the devilish child and said, "Did you memorize it all? If you didn't, be careful of your butt." At this time, a hand reached out from behind the devilish child and completely pushed open the door. A familiar-looking middle-aged man walked in from outside. Seeing that person, Housekeeper Wang was first stunned, then he suddenly stood up from his seat, his face pale, and said with a trembling voice, "Magistrate Dong." At this moment, he felt a lingering fear. Could it be that this little brat had offended Magistrate Dong, and he was here to punish him? Thinking of this, Shopkeeper Wang's legs suddenly felt weak, and he almost collapsed on the chair again. "Let me ask you, this three-word rhyme was written by you. Is there anything else?" Magistrate Dong didn't have time to waste with him. He took the paper and walked in front of him. 3 words of rhyme. Housekeeper Wang stared blankly at the paper in Magistrate Dong's hand that he had just written to the naughty child. He then looked at Magistrate Dong's expression, and his heart slightly relaxed. As long as he wasn't here to denounce him, thinking of this, he immediately changed his expression and explained with an apologetic smile. "I didn't expect such a capable person to exist in such a small mountain village." After listening, Magistrate Dong stroked the short beard on his chin and praised. With his knowledge, he could naturally see the meaning behind these few short sentences. This was clearly a Mongolian text to teach children to learn etiquette. Without etiquette, one would not be able to stand. From a young age, teaching them to develop a kind and honest nature, teaching them to be virtuous, to guard against evil, and to be sincere was also beneficial in developing good family and academic values. If this text could be carried out, it would definitely be a great contribution to education. It would be a good deed that would last for thousands of years. Not only would the difficult problem he was facing be easily solved, if he really made some achievements, there might even be a slight possibility of leaving his name in history, as an official who didn't want to leave a thick stroke in the history books. Just based on other political achievements, to achieve this was tantamount to reaching the heavens. But the merit of education could influence future generations. Thinking of this, even with his temperament, he couldn't help but feel a surge of emotions. "Do you know the entire text?" Magistrate Dong looked at Housekeeper Wang with sparkling eyes and asked. At this moment, he desperately wanted to know if this text was as he imagined it to be, an excellent piece of teaching Mongolian so that he wouldn't rejoice for nothing. "Sir, I only heard about a dozen sentences that day. I don't know if there is the entire text," Housekeeper Wang replied honestly. Magistrate Dong looked at him and thought for a moment before saying, "Send someone to ask the village teacher again. If there really is it, you must bring the entire text back and send it to the yamen." The housekeeper of the Wang Fu could be considered a top figure outside, but in front of Qing and magistrate, he could only nod and say yes. In order to show the importance he placed on this matter, the moment Magistrate Dong's foot left, housekeeper Wang hurriedly left the Wang Fu. He ordered the servant to drive the carriage faster and try to finish this matter in the shortest amount of time possible. Outside the school in Willow Leaf Village, Qin Qing once again saw housekeeper Wang. When she found out that he had not come to find her brother-in-law, but to find her, she was slightly surprised. She had some impression of housekeeper Wang. She only knew that he seemed to be her brother-in-law's friend. A few days ago, she had seen the two of them talking by the stream. She did not slight him, but after hearing the purpose of his visit, she was slightly surprised. "What you were talking about just now, was it this, rules for a disciple, ? Qin Qing returned to the school and took out a thin book that she had personally written. She handed it to housekeeper Wang. Housekeeper Wang quickly took it. After flipping it open, he saw that the first few sentences were exactly the same as what he had heard that day. He flipped a few more pages and saw that there were hundreds of sentences behind. Only then did he realize that what he had heard that day was just a few paragraphs. He was overjoyed. Now he could finally report to Magistrate Dong. "I wonder if you could give me a copy of the original Rules for a Disciple, ? He looked at Qin Qing and asked urgently. Hearing this, Qin Qing hesitated slightly and said, "This Rules for a Disciple was not written by me. I will have to ask before I can give you an answer." "It was not written by you?" Housekeeper Wang's expression froze. Qin Qing nodded and gave him a brief explanation. "It's actually him." Housekeeper Wang murmured a few words. He didn't expect that this article was written by that mean scholar. He was slightly surprised for a while, then smiled and said, "To tell you the truth, I was ordered by Prefectural Magistrate Dong to retrieve the original text of Rules for Disciples." Prefectural Magistrate Dong was very pleased with this article. "This is a great thing for young Master Li." Magistrate Dong. Hearing this, Qin Qing covered her small mouth in surprise and couldn't help but exclaim. For someone like her who had lived here since she was young and rarely left the village, the Anxi County magistrate was already a high position. Any higher would be an unimaginable level for her. Chapter 140. Good, what a good disciple rules! Prefectural Magistrate Dong flipped through the thin book in his hands and the worry on his face disappeared. After reading the entire Disciple Rules, he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Disciple Rules. A person standing quietly in the hall raised his head and looked at Prefectural Magistrate Dong with a confused expression. He didn't know what made Magistrate Dong so happy, and what was this Disciple Rules. "Professor Feng, take a look at this Disciple Rules as well." Seeing the confusion of the person in the hall, Prefectural Magistrate Dong closed the book and handed it over. The man called Professor Feng accepted the book with both hands, his heart full of suspicion. When he looked at it, he saw the beautiful 3 small words on the cover, Disciple Rules. He raised his head and glanced at Prefectural Magistrate Dong before flipping to the first page. There were only a few thousand words, but Professor Feng read very slowly. Gradually, his expression changed from calm to excited. "Magistrate Dong, this Disciple Rules, who wrote it?" Professor Feng raised his head to look at Prefectural Magistrate Dong, his expression shocked. "These 3 words are simple and easy to understand. They promote filial piety, honesty, benevolence, and observance of propriety. It is truly an excellent work for enlightening and educating the disciples." As a prefectural school professor and the head of the prefectural scholars, his responsibility was to educate and instruct. Speaking of which, he understood the meaning of this Disciple Rules even more than Prefectural Magistrate Dong. "Congratulations, Magistrate. With this Disciple Rules, you no longer need to worry about educating." Professor Feng quickly understood the crux of the matter and saluted Prefectural Magistrate Dong with his fists. Of course, he understood the difficulties Prefectural Magistrate Dong faced. If he presented this disciple rules, he could make up for the lack of educating this year. I heard that this article was written by a scholar in the prefecture. I owe it all to him. Prefectural Magistrate Dong was clearly in a good mood and no longer had the troubled expression from before. When the steward of the mansion had delivered the article, he had already told him that this disciple rules was not written by the female teacher. It was written by a young man named Li Yi. Prefectural Magistrate Dong immediately sent someone to investigate the scholar's background. Of course, the most important thing was to confirm whether or not he was from Qing and Fu. If the rules for disciples had already appeared elsewhere, then wouldn't he have been happy for nothing? Fortunately, Li Yi did not disappoint him. He had the title of Xiuzai and was a member of Qing and Prefecture under his rule. Prefectural Magistrate Dong had already memorized this name. If he were to become a high scholar in the future, he could take care of him and recommend him to the Ministry of Appointments so that he could fill the vacancy. It's all thanks to Sir's guidance. Professor Feng flattered him at the right time. If this rules for disciples could be implemented, then the credit of educating would definitely fall onto Magistrate Dong's head. Magistrate Dong seemed to have thought of something. He shook his head and said, "It's just that the elementary scholar named Li Yi doesn't seem to want to improve himself. He doesn't focus on his studies and wants to become a high scholar as soon as possible. Instead, he opens a shop in the city. A good scholar doesn't want to be a businessman. If I hadn't sent someone to verify this, I wouldn't have believed that he was the one who wrote the rules for disciples." Li Yi. Professor Feng paused and asked, "Is it the Li Yi who wrote Immortal Magpie Bridge and Shuidiao Getu?" Professor Feng also knows this person. Prefectural Magistrate Dong raised his eyebrows and asked. "The Li Yi I know is the one who wrote Immortal Magpie Bridge and Shuidiao Getu. Li Yi is unparalleled in poetry and was called the #1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom by the Secretary of Education. I don't know if it's the same person that Sir is talking about," Professor Feng said after some thought. Shuidiao Getu. The poem that was circulated during the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet. Prefectural Magistrate Dong furrowed his eyebrows. In his opinion, poetry was just a small path and had no use in governing a country. It was all leftovers from their playtime. As for the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet, he only went through the motions and didn't pay much attention to it. Later, he only heard about Shuidiao Getu from the daughter of the manor. As for who wrote the poem, he wasn't too sure. If it is really as Sir says, then this kind of scholar who doesn't know how to improve should be given a beating. If we can get him to return to the right path, perhaps he will be another good talent in the future. Professor Feng heard this and said with a frown. As a prefectural professor, what he did the most was to teach and guide the students of the prefectural school. Who knew how many stubborn and mischievous students had walked the right path under his guidance? I didn't think that the teacher would have such an evaluation of him. I am even more curious about this person. A look of interest appeared on Prefectural Magistrate Dong's face as he stroked the short beard on his chin. These few days, the young masters and misses of Qing and Prefectural City had many complaints about the Rui workshop. Since a few days ago, this shop had stopped selling Rui Du. They could only rely on previous orders to get the goods. This caused many people who didn't have the time to buy to feel regret. In the present Qing and Prefectural City, Rui Du had clearly become the leading fashion trend. Young ladies, scholars, and scholars all fought to buy it. The sudden cessation of sales created a significant impact in these high society circles. However, just as they couldn't hold it in any longer and planned to go to the Rui workshop to ask the reason, in the span of a night, many shops selling Rui Du suddenly appeared in the prefectural city. At first, people were skeptical. After all, there had only been one shop selling the Rui Du in the past few days. It was said that many people who wanted to buy the recipe of the Rui Du were all rejected. How could so many shops suddenly appear? Of course, an extremely small number of people didn't have any suspicions. Behind these shops was Ning Wang Fu. How could there be a problem with what they were selling? Of course, most people's suspicions were completely dispelled after they personally went to the Rui workshop to ask. The shopkeeper of the Rui workshop personally admitted that what the shops were selling was genuine Rui Do. In other words, from now on, there would no longer be a situation where Rui Do was out of stock and people couldn't buy it even if they wanted to. After the suspicions disappeared, a new wave of panic buying immediately erupted in the prefectural city. Countless people rushed to the newly opened shops. The workers in the shops couldn't keep up. They even had to temporarily transfer some people from other places to stabilize the situation. When shopkeeper Wang heard this news, his initial shock turned to disbelief. In the blink of an eye, he became ecstatic. His heart that had been hanging in the air finally relaxed. The popularity of the Rui Do far exceeded his expectations. At this rate, in just a few days, he would be able to recoup all the capital he had invested. If this situation could continue, in 2 months, not only would he be able to make up for the shortfall, the income of the Wang Fu would definitely exceed that of previous years. The business of hard liquor was still in preparation. There was also the perfume and soap that the scholar had mentioned. If the profits from these businesses could be like the Rui Do, just thinking about it made housekeeper Wang's blood boil. His little prince had finally done something reliable. Chapter 141. Have you heard? Other than the Rui workshop, a few more shops in the city have started selling Rui Do. How come I didn't know? Is the news true? It's true. Today, a few more shops in the city have Rui Do on sale. Before I came, I saw someone buy it. Let's hurry to that shop. If we're late, we'll have to wait a few more days. Seeing a few scholarly-looking youths pass by them and rush in a certain direction, a middle-aged man wearing an ordinary Confucian robe said with some confusion, "These days, there's an item called Rui Do. It's all the rage in the prefectural city, especially among the socialites. Why are these men rushing like ducks for it?" Another person beside him said, Magistrate, you may not know this, but this Rui nectar is highly regarded among the students. By smearing it on one's body, it can relieve fatigue, refresh one's mind, and increase one's spirit by 100 times. When a student is tired from studying, just a few drops would be enough for them to continue studying. These two people, dressed in plain clothes, walking slowly on the street, were Magistrate Dong and Professor Feng. Because of the rules for disciples, they were very curious about the elementary scholar named Li Yi. They wanted to see for themselves what kind of person was able to write such a piece of Mongolian literature, and what kind of person he was. Of course, other than this reason, they also wanted to use this opportunity to teach him to turn over a new leaf and diligently seek scholarly honors. If he really did succeed in the future, the magistrate and the professor would personally come to reprimand him, causing him to suddenly come to his senses and devote himself to studying. This would become a legend. If that's the case, then he has benefited the students of Qing and Prefecture, Magistrate Dong said with some surprise. He was not unfamiliar with this Rui Do. These days, the women in the family often used this item. The mistress had even mentioned to him that this item was being fought over by many socialites. If she hadn't sent a servant girl to buy dozens of bottles, she probably wouldn't have been able to buy it. However, this was the first time he knew that this Rui Do had such an effect. If he could help these students and make them study more diligently, it would be a great contribution. Professor Feng nodded and said, "Yes, in the prefectural school, there are already many students who have responded that this item is indeed very useful for studying. I am thinking of purchasing a batch to see if it can be popularized." Yesterday, after Prefectural Magistrate Dong had asked to see the scholar named Li Yi, he had done some research. Only then did he discover that the author of Rules for Disciples was the person the Minister of Education called the #1 scholar in the Jing Kingdom. At the same time, he was also the shopkeeper of the Rui workshop in Qingyang Prefecture. The popular Rui nectar in the prefectural city was also made by him. Although this item is good, but... Prefectural Magistrate Dong changed the topic and said, but, as a scholar, he should focus his efforts on obtaining scholarly honors. This person has such talent, we really shouldn't waste it. Professor Feng hurriedly said, Prefectural Magistrate Dong is right. Since he can write a teaching article like Rules for Disciples, he must have a unique understanding of teaching. Why don't we let him be a scholar in the district school? This way, he won't delay his examination and he can also contribute to the teaching of the prefectural school. That would be good. Prefectural Magistrate Dong nodded and agreed deeply. At this time, Professor Feng pointed ahead and said, Sir, we are about to reach the Rui workshop. A moment later, at the entrance of the Rui workshop, Prefectural Magistrate Dong raised his head to look at the signboard that said Rui workshop. He couldn't help but exclaim, good calligraphy. No wonder the Minister of Education has such a high opinion of him. Just based on this calligraphy, I'm afraid there aren't many people in this world who can compare. Professor Feng was also secretly amazed. After a long time, his gaze finally moved away from the signboard. He turned his head and said, Sir, please, as the saying goes, if you want to capture a woman's heart, you must first capture her stomach. Li Yi felt that he was very close to this goal. After his previous warm invitations, the female constable named Mingzu would always ask for a glass of wine when she passed by the shop while patrolling the streets. If it was mealtime, she would sometimes sit down and freeload a meal. This kind of unconventional and forthright personality didn't seem like someone from the royal family. She was more like someone from the pugilistic world. Li Yi would occasionally wonder if she was really a princess or a princess. However, looking at Li Xian, he knew that the members of the royal family of the Jing kingdom were all special. At least they were very close to the people. After all, since ancient times, he had never heard of any princess or princess taking being a constable as their profession. Regardless of whether she was experiencing this kind of life on a whim, from an outsider's point of view, at least she was very responsible. This also made Li Yi look at her in a new light. With such a loyal constable who abhorred evil, he would come to the store whenever he had nothing to do. Who would be stupid enough to cause trouble here? As Li Yi was thinking about this, two figures walked into the shop. Although Magistrate Dong was wearing plain clothes today and not his official robes, he had been in a high position for a long time. He naturally had the aura of a superior. After all, he was going to teach that scholar a lesson. His expression was slightly serious, but he didn't show any anger. Looking into the hall, the first person he saw was not the scholar, but a beautiful woman wearing a light blue constable's uniform. When Magistrate Dong entered, the woman happened to raise her head to look at him. The moment he saw the woman, Magistrate Dong stopped in his tracks. His body trembled, and the dignified expression on his face disappeared. His expression became serious, and he was about to speak when the woman waved her hand casually. Magistrate Dong's words were immediately stuck in his throat. Professor Feng did not recognize the woman. After entering, he wore the serious expression that he usually wore in front of students. He walked to the side of the only young man in the hall and asked, "You are Li Yi?" Li Yi's face showed a look of shock. No way, someone really came to cause trouble. This person showed a grim face the moment he entered, and named him by name. One look and he knew that this person did not come with good intentions. He turned his head to look at Mingzu and blinked. As a constable, this person came to bully you right in front of your face, and you don't care? Mingzu took a sip of wine, the expression on her pretty face did not change. Seeing that Li Yi did not answer, Professor Feng thought that he had frightened him and continued to ask, "That the disciple rules, was it your creation?" Disciple rules. Li Yi finally understood that the other person was not here to cause trouble. Yesterday, Qing had told him that the magistrate had sent someone to take away the disciple rules that he had modified. At that time, Li Yi had been a little surprised. The only people who knew about the disciple rules were him, Qing, and those naughty children. How did the magistrate know about it? But now was not the time to think about this. The magistrate was a very high position. The magistrate of Qing Prefecture was almost equivalent to the mayor of a municipality in the future. The rank was very high, and Li Yi did not dare to slight him. He immediately stood up. "Welcome, Lord Prefectural Magistrate. Please take a seat, please take a seat." He did not know how to greet such a high official, so he hurriedly said this based on the little impression he had seen in the television series. Li Yi's action shocked Professor Feng. The serious expression on his face immediately disappeared. The magistrate was right beside him. Even if he had a few more guts, he would not dare to sit. Chapter 142. Professor Feng was choked by Li Yi's words. He coughed dryly and said awkwardly, "Ahem, don't talk nonsense. I am the prefectural school professor of Qing Prefecture. Call me a beast." Li Yi looked at the middle-aged man in front of him with some surprise. His first thought was that he was actually a university professor in the future. He then realized that professor seemed to be an official position here, mainly responsible for the education of a prefecture. The prefectural school professor of Qing Prefecture was almost equivalent to the director of the city's education bureau in the future. However, he didn't plan on taking the imperial examinations. Even if he was the director of the education bureau, he wouldn't be able to control him, much less the director of the education bureau. Since he wasn't the prefectural magistrate, Li Yi didn't need to be so careful. However, he still had the necessary etiquette. After all, he still had the identity of a scholar. He bowed respectfully and said, "Sir, the rules of a disciple was written by me." Shamelessly claiming the fruits of someone else's labor as his own, he blushed slightly. Professor Feng nodded slightly. The young man in front of him looked talented. Looking at his words and actions, he seemed to be a person who knew how to behave. His first impression of him was not bad. However, thinking about it, to be able to write an essay like, "The Rules of a Disciple," his character would certainly not be bad. If he could be guided a little and get him on the right path, he might be able to achieve great things in the future. In layman's terms, he felt that Li Yi still needed to be saved. He nodded in satisfaction and then turned to look at Prefectural Magistrate Dong. After all, Prefectural Magistrate Dong was the main character today. There were some things that he shouldn't meddle in. Prefectural Magistrate Dong didn't seem to see his gaze. He looked around at the decorations in the shop. One moment he looked at the shelves, the next moment he looked at the paintings on the wall. He didn't seem to speak at all. Seeing this, Professor Feng was slightly taken aback. He wondered what was wrong with Prefectural Magistrate Dong. Didn't he say he would personally lecture him? Before he came, Prefectural Magistrate Dong had specifically told him not to reveal his identity and to just treat him as one of his tutors. However, Professor Feng didn't dare to treat him as a tutor. Seeing this, he didn't dare to remind him and could only do it himself. What Professor Feng didn't know was that Prefectural Magistrate Dong was still curious as to why Princess Yongla was here. What was her relationship with this scholar? Why would she speak so casually? Professor Feng looked at Li Yi and said in a deep voice, "The rhythm of this disciple rules is easy to read and the content is simple. It preaches the way of the sage. I have discussed with the prefectural magistrate, and we wish to use it as an introductory book to spread throughout the prefecture. Are you willing?" Li Yi was not surprised by Professor Feng's words. Yesterday, when Qing told him about this matter, Li Yi had already prepared himself for someone to come looking for him. After such a long time, he had more or less figured out the situation of this world. When he first read the annals of the Jing Kingdom, he was completely clueless about the history of the Jing kingdom. However, when he went back further, he could find some familiar traces. Xia, Shang, Zhou, Qin, Chu, Han, three kingdoms, Wei, Jin, and northern and southern dynasties were all there. The general direction remained the same, but when Li Yi compared more specific details, characters, or some minor events with the history books in the library, he found that there were still some discrepancies. The wheel of history officially began to deviate and diverge, probably during the Sui and Tang dynasties. The country named Tang ended the chaotic times at the end of the Sui dynasty. However, not long after the country was founded, it welcomed a major split, forming a regime similar to the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. The Jing kingdom was established at that time, and it had been 50 to 60 years since then. There was no 3-character classic or 1,000-character classic in this world. Although there were other introductory books to replace them, they were relatively obscure and not suitable for children to learn. They were far from being as easy to understand as the disciple rules. The disciple rules still had a lot of controversy in later generations. Some people said that it promoted foolish teachings, and was only suitable for the ancient feudal society. Both sides expressed their own views, and the controversy was not small. However, in the current Jing kingdom, where Confucianism was still the mainstream, no one dared to say that the disciple rules promoted foolish teachings. The father was the ruler of the sons, and the monarch was the ruler of the ministers. Daring to say that this was a feudal way of thinking, did you want to rebel? With such a big label on your head, even the most powerful person would be crushed to death. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Li Yi looked at Professor Feng, cupped his fists and said, "Everything is up to you, Your Excellency." This professor had already discussed with the prefectural magistrate, and he still came to ask for his opinion. Wasn't this too much? If he really felt that it was not good to take something from someone else for free, he could just give him a few thousand taels of silver. You are worth teaching. Professor Feng was even more satisfied. He thought to himself that this elementary scholar was not like what he had thought. He looked like a promising talent. As Emingsu listened to the conversation between the two of them, she could not help but feel a trace of happiness in her heart. What was this disciple's rules? It actually made Prefectural Magistrate Dong and the Prefectural School professor come to visit at the same time. Could it be that this scholar had some abilities that she did not know of? As she thought of this, when she looked at Li Yi again, a strange look appeared in her eyes. As for Prefectural Magistrate Dong, he had already completely become a qualified follower. He stood behind Professor Feng without saying a word, most of his attention was on Emingsu. Since you have such talent, why don't you think of improving yourself and take the imperial examinations to serve the country? As a scholar, you actually chose to walk such a lowly path. Have all these years of reading by the sages been in vain? After asking Li Yi symbolically and going through the process once, the next thing to do was to get to the main point. Professor Feng's face was stern as he looked at him and said this sternly. His voice also raised a few pitches. This was also the way he usually reprimanded his students. Li Yi was shocked. He did not expect this guy to change his attitude so quickly. Just a moment ago, he was talking to him in a friendly manner, and the next moment, he turned into a coffin face. Li Yi did not react for a moment and stood there in a daze. His expression fell into Professor Feng's eyes. Naturally, he was ashamed of his words and was on the verge of repentance. Professor Feng's expression softened as he looked at him and said, "Since you have done a good job in educating the prefectural school, I can make an exception and allow you to become a scholar in the county school. It will not affect your studies and will also be of great help to you in the future when you take the imperial examinations. First knock him unconscious with a stick, then feed him a sweet date." Professor Feng had been in charge of the prefectural school for so many years and had long since perfected this method. He raised his head slightly and looked at the scholar in front of him, waiting for the moment when he would be deeply grateful to him. Although the rank of a county school official was not high, it was still an official. A high scholar might not care about it, but it was a position that many elementary scholars would fight to get. If he was lucky enough to become a high scholar in the future, he might be directly promoted to a teacher and would not have to wait for the Ministry of Appointments to appoint him. Scholar. After Li Yi reacted, his expression immediately changed. Not long ago, he had rejected the position of the school teacher and now someone wanted him to become a scholar. He was completely uninterested in this. If he really became a scholar, he would be under the control of others. He would no longer be able to lie comfortably in the courtyard and bask in the sun. He would also not be able to do things as he pleased. He would probably only be able to earn a few taels of silver a month. He might as well sell a bottle of rui. In just a moment, Li Yi rejected this suggestion. Why, you are not willing? Professor Feng looked at him and asked with a frown. It's not that I am not willing. Li Yi straightened his body and bowed to Professor Feng. With a troubled expression, he said, it's just that I have had a chronic illness since I was young. Every time I think about taking the imperial examinations and becoming an official, I would be bedridden. I had no choice but to give up on the imperial examinations and become a businessman. Your Excellency, I am very grateful for your kindness. However, because I was born with a chronic illness, I can only thank you for your kindness. Professor Feng was stunned. What kind of chronic illness was this? In this world, was there an illness that prevented one from becoming an official? Chapter 143. Naturally, Professor Feng did not know what terminal laziness cancer meant. None of the students he taught had ever talked nonsense to him with such a straight face. He was still suspicious. Could this really be a strange illness that he had never heard of before? An illness that prevents one from becoming an official. And Mingzu had a strange look in her eyes. As for Magistrate Dong, who had been standing silently at the side, his face began to darken. This scholar clearly had no interest in fame and did not want to become a mere academic official. He made up this chronic illness that prevents one from becoming an official to fool Professor Feng, and Professor Feng actually believed it. If Princess Yongla was not present at this moment, Magistrate Dong would have reprimanded this unambitious and self-deprecating student. If everyone was as lazy as him, how could the country recruit talents? Forget it, forget it. Since you have an illness, then rest well. We'll talk about this later. Professor Feng shook his head and sighed. In the prefectural school, there were many students who participated in the imperial examinations. After failing many times, they became absent-minded and eventually went crazy. There were also people who suffered from the shock of failing for a long time and fell ill. Whenever they picked up a book, they would have a splitting headache. Professor Feng had been an official for many years and had seen many such cases. He subconsciously categorized Li Yi as such a person. Fame was important, but it was not worth it to lose one's life for it. Hearing Professor Feng's words, Li Yi was slightly stunned. Did this lord really believe it? At this moment, he couldn't help but feel a little guilty in his heart. Deceiving such an honest person really made him feel a little uneasy. I did not expect such a strange illness to exist in this world. This official is truly ignorant. After walking out of Fortune Square, Professor Feng let out a long sigh. There was a deep sense of regret in his tone. Do you really think that he was speaking the truth? Magistrate Dong looked at him with a strange expression. Magistrate Dong had to admit that aside from Princess Yongla, after this incident, his impression of that scholar had become even deeper. Magistrate Dong, what do you mean? Professor Feng looked at him with a face full of confusion. A moment later, a man on the street suddenly flew into a rage and attracted the attention of many people. This brat, how dare he deceive me? Professor Feng was seething with anger. He had been in charge of the school for so many years, and when the students saw him, they were all respectful and courteous. When had he ever met such a stubborn person? At this moment, Professor Feng's heart was filled with doubt. Was the rules for disciples really written by him? As a dignified professor of the Imperial College, he had actually been fooled by an elementary scholar. This was a great humiliation to him. Professor Feng's face was filled with anger. He rolled up his sleeves and was about to leave when he said angrily, "Humph, I have seen many people like him. Even if he is a rotten piece of wood, I will make him repent." Over the years, he had taught countless students, but he had also encountered quite a few stubborn people. Professor Feng had developed an obsession with Li Yi. Magistrate Dong shook his head and pulled him back in time. Forget it, forget it. I'm afraid he doesn't care about fame at all. No matter what we say, it's just playing the lute to a cow. Since Professor Feng did not want to be a scholar, they could not force him. Furthermore, there was the princess in the shop, so they could not let Professor Feng meddle. Professor Feng did not know her identity. If he said something wrong and offended the princess, it would not be good. Just as Professor Feng's heart was filled with anger, but he could not go against Magistrate Dong's wishes. Inside the shop, Li Yi was sitting lazily on a chair with his legs crossed. He sipped on his tea and looked extremely relaxed. Why do you not want to be a scholar? Mingsu hugged her saber in front of her chest and looked at him with interest. Ever since the imperial examination system was established, countless students studied hard. Wasn't it so that one day they could pass the imperial examinations and fight for a position in the government? It was rare to see a scholar who did not want to be an official. Li Yi pursed his lips and swallowed a mouthful of tea. He said, "What's so good about being a lowly scholar? There's no rank, and you're ordered around all day. It's boring. If you want to be an official, you should at least be a county magistrate. At the very least, you should be a county lieutenant. What's the point of being a scholar? If you want to have a foothold in this world and not be bullied, you have to know how to hug someone's thigh. But rather than hugging someone else's thigh, it's better to be someone's thigh yourself." There was no need to be a high-ranking official. Even if it was a small county magistrate, at least he would not be bullied. As for being a scholar, he had never considered it. A county magistrate is directly appointed by the emperor. It's a 7th-ranked official position. If you want to be a county magistrate, why don't you try your best to pass the imperial examinations? Even the 8th-ranked county lieutenants have passed the imperial examinations. You're just a small elementary scholar. You don't even have the qualifications to register with the Ministry of Personnel. Naturally, you won't be able to become a county magistrate. Mingsu looked at him and said calmly. This time, Li Yi did not speak. He was just saying it casually. With his lazy personality, if he were to really be in charge, he would only find it interesting in the beginning. After a long time, he would definitely be bored. Let's go. The female constable did not pursue the matter. She finished the small jar of wine and tossed out these 2 words lightly. Then, she continued to patrol the streets. County Lieutenant. The moment she stepped out of the main door, the corner of her mouth curved slightly. In an instant, it disappeared without a trace. In the prefectural yamen, Prefectural Magistrate Dong, who had just returned to his manor, carefully read the memorial he had already written a few times. After checking that there were no mistakes, he quickly sent it out. Based on the distance between Qing and Prefecture and the capital, it would take 2 days if it was fast, 3 if it was slow. This memorial would be presented to the emperor's desk. Teaching was no small matter. Although as the prefectural magistrate, he could make all the decisions in the prefecture. If he really wanted to implement the rules for disciples, in Qing and Prefecture, he had to first get the emperor's approval. Of course, before he wrote this memorial, he already knew that this matter was just going through the motions. The rules for disciples was indeed very beneficial for children. The emperor was not a pedantic person. If there were no accidents, in a few days, there would be good news from the capital. At the same time, on the other side of the prefectural city, the female constable walked into an exquisite courtyard. A female official came to greet her from afar. Princess. Not long after, someone walked out of the courtyard and delivered a letter to the relay station. Although the shop in the prince's manor had already opened, because of the shortage a few days ago, the supply of rui nectar could not meet the demand. Just after noon, the rui nectar in the shop was sold out again. It was a bit boring to stay in the shop. A few girls were left to look after the shop. Of course, Fong had to stay as well. Li Yi slowly walked out of the shop alone. Son-in-law, where are you going? Fong raised his head and asked. Back to the stronghold, to eat hot pot, he lazily replied and walked in the direction of the car dealership. Hot pot. Fong paused for a moment and wiped away his saliva. Although he didn't know what this hot pot was, every time the son-in-law mentioned the word eat, he couldn't help but salivate. Chapter 144. The charcoal fire was burning brightly under the stove, and steam was bubbling out of the pot. Li Yi put the thinly sliced mutton into the pot. After it was scalded by the soup, it quickly flipped over. Just as he was about to reach out his chopsticks to pick it up, a shadow suddenly flashed before his eyes and snatched away the mutton that he had just placed in the pot. Li Yi glanced at Lu Rui. In terms of hand speed, he was still not comparable to Mississippi Lu. Seeing that she was the one who cut the mutton today, he would not argue with her over such a small matter. He picked up another piece of mutton that was as thin as a piece of paper and dipped it in the seasoning bowl that he had prepared beforehand. It melted in his mouth. To be able to cut the mutton into such thin pieces, Mississippi Lu's knife skills were indeed worthy of her reputation. Of course, hot pot could not be eaten without spicy food. He did not find a place that sold chili in the market, but fortunately, there were all kinds of seasonings here, so he found a substitute. Although the spiciness was still not comparable to chili, he could only make do with it. Xiao Huan, add some tofu. Oh right, add some vegetables too, and also mushrooms, carrots. Li Yi instructed the maidservant while taking a sip of fruit wine. Although eating hot pot in autumn was not as enjoyable as eating in winter, Li Yi, who had been itching for it for a long time, could not wait that long. Husband, eat slowly. No one is going to fight with you. Lu Rui said in amusement as she watched Li Yi pick up a piece of tofu from the pot and put it into his mouth. He was so hot that he sucked in air and did not want to spit it out. Why is no one fighting with you? Li Yi glanced at Mississippi Lu who was sitting opposite him. His hands did not stop moving and he scooped up the mutton that he had just placed in the pot. It would be winter in 2 months, and there would be many opportunities to eat hot pot in the future. It was necessary to instill in Mississippi Lu the etiquette of eating hot pot. It was very impolite to take away something that was deliberately placed in the pot. Eating hot pot was actually about the atmosphere. The whole family gathered around the small stove and chatted while eating. The young maidservant had not been with Li Yi recently. It was not easy for her to have a chance. Once she opened her mouth, she could not close it again. Fong came over because of the smell. As soon as he pushed the door open, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. His eyes were glued to the hot pot in the middle of the room. Fong is here. Xiao Huan, go add a pair of chopsticks for Uncle Fong, Li Yi said to Xiao Huan. How can I accept this? Fong's face revealed his signature silly smile again. With a face full of embarrassment, he moved a small chair and sat beside Li Yi, waiting for Xiao Huan to bring him a pair of chopsticks. After fishing in the pot, nothing came out. His smile froze on his face. Oh, I'm sorry, the dishes are all gone. If only you had come earlier. Li Yi looked up at Fong and asked tentatively, would you like to drink some soup? There was still a bit of mutton left, and the dishes were not finished. Seeing Li Yi add soup into the pot, and the meat and vegetables were all in the pot, Fong's face revealed a happy expression again. While waiting for the dishes to be cooked, Fong took out a translucent object from his bosom and handed it to Li Yi, saying, "Son-in-law, the soap you mentioned last time seems to be done. Take a look and see if it works." Looking at the square object in Fong's hand, Li Yi's eyes couldn't help but light up. In this era where the poor commonly used honey locust beans to bathe, to have a piece of soap was a very happy thing. Some time ago, Fong bought some alkaline flour and lime, and used saponification to make a batch of soap. The cold-made soap needed nearly a month to mature before it could be used. During this time, Li Yi was busy with Rui's due, so he asked Fong to count the days and inform him when the time was right. Having just finished eating the hot pot, it was inevitable that his hands were a little greasy. He couldn't wait to get some water, and after rubbing the soap in the water, a layer of rich foam appeared on his hands. This was the advantage of handmade soap. There was a lot of foam, strong decontamination ability, and at the same time, it had an amazing cleaning ability without causing any damage to the skin. When Li Yi made the first batch of soap, he didn't add any messy things in it. Although it didn't look good, it was very practical. After rubbing the foam on his hands for a while, and then rinsing it with water, there was no longer any greasy feeling on his hands. "Son-in-law, what is this?" Xiaohuan blinked her curious eyes and looked at the soap in Li Yi's hands. She was very curious about this thing that could produce foam. "And this is called soap. It's used to wash your hands and bathe. It's much better than bath beans. So it's pancreas." The servant girl nodded as if she understood. "What pancreas? Can pancreas be compared to my soap?" Li Yi pinched her little face and said, "I just finished eating the hot pot. There's a smell on my body. Go and take a bath." "Xiaohuan doesn't have a smell." The servant girl stretched out her sleeve and smelled it. She muttered and ran to the kitchen to boil water. When Li Yi turned around, he found that Mississippi Lu was playing with bubbles. She seemed to be very interested in the soap. Then, Li Yi's first piece of soap was mercilessly confiscated by her. She would bathe every day after she came back from cultivation. This soap was obviously better than bath beans. Seeing that he couldn't beat her, Li Yi didn't argue with her. The first batch of soap was about 10 pieces. He kept some at home and gave the rest to Fong and the others to divide. The soap he made didn't add any chemical stabilizers, preservatives. Of course, even if Li Yi wanted to, he didn't add any. Under normal circumstances, it could only be used for about a year. According to the tutorial in the book, he actually made it in one go. Next, he would make some in small batches, improve the process, and add some essential oils and spices to it. Then, it would be the real soap. As for the current product, it could only be called soap. If he added some sulfur, it would be sulfur soap. It had a certain effect of killing germs and pests, and could prevent diseases. In this era where hygiene awareness was still very low, it had a higher practical value. Rui's soap had been retired for a long time. It was time to introduce a new product. This time, Li Yi planned to take the low-end and high-end routes. The ordinary soap would be sold at a lower price, and the scented soap would be slightly more expensive, going the route of the aristocracy. Of course, the fragrance could also be customized, but the price would be higher. Covering both the low-end and high-end markets, the profits would probably be higher than Rui's soap. However, because the production period was too long, it would probably be next year before the soap could be officially sold. With the help of the other shops, the business of Rui's soap gradually decreased after 2 days. There were a few girls and Fong in the shop to take care of it, so he didn't need to worry. He hadn't left the mountain for 2 days. When he had nothing to do, he practiced martial arts, told a few adapted fairy tales to the little maidservants, or found some interesting books in the library to recharge himself. His days were very leisurely. It was late at night, and the Willow Leaf village was very quiet. Hundreds of miles away, in the imperial palace of Jingdu, in a magnificent palace, it was also quiet. Chapter 145. Occasionally, the sound of paper flipping could be heard in the frighteningly quiet main hall, interspersed with a few light coughs. Right now, the most powerful person in the Jing kingdom was putting down a memorial that had been sent from the northern border. His dignified face showed signs of fatigue. The disaster year has just passed. The flood in the south is beginning to appear. The problem of banditry in the northwest is still unresolved. The Qi kingdom is ready to make trouble and wants to invade the border of the Jing kingdom. Am I really not a good emperor? Why does God want the people of the Jing kingdom to suffer so much? After reading several memorials in succession, all of them were worrying matters. The man muttered a few words. For a moment, he didn't know whether he should continue reading or not. At this moment, the door of the palace opened quietly. A stooped figure walked in silently. It was an old man with a face full of wrinkles. His face was white and beardless. He wore an ordinary gray robe. He walked up the steps and stood in front of the wide table. He said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, concubine Yan has returned from a visit today. She is waiting outside the hall." There was a trace of femininity in the old voice, but no emotion could be heard. "It is very late. Go tell her that if there is anything, we can talk about it tomorrow." The man heard the words and waved his hand. At this time, he was annoyed and did not want to see anyone. He did not even want to see his most beloved empress. Naturally, he did not want to see concubine Yan. The old man nodded and quietly retreated. After a while, he came back again and presented an item in his hand. He replied, "Your Majesty, concubine Yan has returned to the palace. She sent me to present this item to your Majesty. This item is called Rui Du." Concubine Yan brought it back from a visit. It is said that it has the effect of dispelling fatigue. Oh. Emperor Jing took the small porcelain bottle from his hand. When he was about to open it, the old man said again, "Your Majesty, the origin of this item is unknown. Should we let the Imperial Physician Bureau examine it first, and then?" Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "It does not matter. This is her kind intention. Besides, concubine Yan will not harm me. By the way, how should I use this item?" "Her Highness, concubine Yan, said that you can drip this on your hand," the old man said. He had personally tested it just now. When this thing was dripped on the body, it would indeed emit a strange smell. It could slightly stimulate one's spirit, and it could also be considered to have the effect of dispelling fatigue. Based on his decades of experience, this thing was not poison. Of course, if this thing needed to be taken to be effective, he would not let His Majesty take the risk, regardless of whether concubine Yan had good intentions or not. The man opened the lid of the porcelain bottle, and a fragrant smell wafted out. When he heard that some students were using Rui Du to study, Li Yi added a little more peppermint to the Rui Du. Since they wanted to be refreshed, he would let them be refreshed. He had not followed concubine Yan's instructions and dripped the thing on his hand, but he already felt a little clearer. A strange look flashed through Emperor Jing's eyes. He murmured, "This thing is strange. Concubine Yan's hometown is in Qing and Prefecture, right? I will add this item to the tributes of Qing and Prefecture and send a batch every month." Since it had the effect of dispelling fatigue, he put the porcelain bottle aside and reached for the next memorial. After opening it, he smiled and said, "What a coincidence." This memorial was sent by the prefectural magistrate of Qing'an. The memorial was very long, with more than 1,000 words. He read it for a full quarter of an hour. After he finished reading, a trace of a smile finally appeared on his face. He said, "Rules for disciples, it is really a superior Mongolian text. Such an article was actually written by a scholar. If those old fellows in the Directorate of Scholars read it, they would be so ashamed that they would not have the face to see anyone. He picked up his brush and wrote the word, approved. This meant that Prefectural Magistrate Dong wanted to implement this Mongolian text in Qing and Prefecture, and he had approved it. Although compared to the things he was worried about, this was only a small matter, but it was still one of the few pieces of good news. It caused the haze in his heart to slightly dissipate. Of course, as for the name of the scholar, he only glanced at it and did not take it to heart. If this article was really implemented, then the scholar could be considered to have been enlightened. However, he was only a scholar and was not worthy of the emperor personally rewarding him. The local authorities would naturally do such things. Seeing that the man's mood seemed to have improved, the old eunuch's cold expression also softened. He took another step forward and said, "Your Majesty, Princess Yongle has sent a letter." "Oh, Yongle, that girl, you finally remembered her father." A smile appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Hearing this news, all of his worries were thrown to the back of his mind. He said, "Where is the letter? Show it to me." The old eunuch took out a letter from his sleeve. No one knew how many things could be hidden in his sleeve. When he took it out the second time, he actually took out a small jar of wine. He said, "Your Majesty, this was also sent by someone from Princess Yongle." Seeing this, Emperor Jing stilled slightly. He took the jar of wine. After opening it, a thick fragrance of wine wafted over. Just by smelling it, he knew that this wine would not be bad. The old eunuch at the side couldn't help but gulp. When he was inspecting the wine just now, he couldn't resist secretly taking a sip. Even now, the strong taste was still lingering in his mind. Good wine. Fiercely drinking a mouthful of strong wine, Emperor Jing's eyes brightened. He praised, "Yongle, that girl, still knows what I like." She eagerly opened the letter. Part of the content was about the governance of Qing and Fu. Emperor Jing smiled. With her there was no need to even send an imperial censor. After that, it was the greetings between father and daughter. Yongle's temper was a bit stubborn, but she had been sensible since she was young. She won his favor the most. Even though they were in the imperial family, the relationship between father and daughter was still very deep. When he read the end, Emperor Jing's expression froze. He showed some shock and murmured, "Anshi County military officer. Li Yi." Seeing this name, a trace of confusion appeared on his face. In the next moment, he seemed to remember something and flipped open the memorial again. A moment later, a look of realization appeared on his face. Yongle actually admires this person so much. Never mind, let her do as she wishes. Emperor Jing murmured a few words and suddenly said, "Changde." "This old servant is here," the old eunuch said in a low voice. "Draft the edict. Tomorrow, have someone send this edict to Qing and Fu." Emperor Jing was in a good mood that night. He finished writing the edict and looked at the unfinished memorial on the table. He waved his hand and said, "I will approve these tomorrow." The old eunuch heard the meaning behind his words and said, "Where will your Majesty rest tonight?" Emperor Jing thought for a moment and said, "Announcing Peace Palace." Announcing Peace Palace, concubine Yan's residence. Chapter 146. Outside the Announcing Peace Palace, the old eunuch named Changde looked at the imperial edict in his hand with a hint of doubt in his muddy old eyes. It was really strange that a mere secondary Class 8 county lieutenant could be rewarded by the emperor himself. Soon, the doubt on his face disappeared. The emperor's heart was hard to predict. He only needed to pass down the edict. As an official of the emperor, he had served 2 generations of emperors and was very clear about what he should do. He looked back at the palace in the night and the old figure disappeared under the palace wall. He didn't know if it was a psychological reason, but he didn't feel anything when he washed his face before. These days, he washed his hands with soap in the morning and felt much more refreshed. Although the homemade soap looked a little ugly, it was very useful. Ever since he knew that Xiaohuan used this thing called soap to wash her face in the morning, the few pieces left for Fang and the others were all snatched up by the women in the village. Fang didn't feel anything about it. He just got a basin of water in the morning and washed his face carelessly. Only women and the son-in-law would be so fussy. He only left one piece for his mother-in-law and gave the rest to the younger girls. He heard from the son-in-law that he would make a soap with a fragrance in the future and call it fragrant soap. Fang didn't understand why the son-in-law was always fiddling with these things for women. He was a man, but why didn't he have any manliness? Standing in the courtyard early in the morning, waiting to go to the shop with Li Yi, Fang saw him rubbing the soap until his hands and face were covered with it. He accidentally dropped the soap on the stool. Fang shook his head helplessly and let out a long sigh. Son-in-law. Li Yi had just washed the soap off his hands when he suddenly heard Fang's voice. What's wrong? Li Yi raised his head and looked at him. You dropped the soap. Fang pointed at the soap that Li Yi had accidentally dropped and reminded him. Clang! The copper basin on the stool was also accidentally touched by Li Yi and fell to the ground, splashing the water on his face. In the shop, the four girls could already take charge of the shop. Li Yi was happy to be free. If he wanted to go to the shop, he would. If he did not want to go, he would stay in the stockade village. He would tell stories to Xiaohuan, talk with Rui about life's ideals, practice martial arts when the weather was good, and fantasize about when he could fly in the sky like Mississippi Liu. Li Xian would occasionally go to the shop to voice out his doubts. There were many problems that were difficult to explain to him according to the current scientific understanding. Li Yi could only subtly instill some thinking methods, such as deduction, induction, analogy, and so on. He had already given him the stepping stone. As for whether he could break the door of science with this brick, it still depended on his luck. In the meantime, Li Xian also had Li Yi draw a painting for him. More accurately, it was for Wang Fei. Wang Fei's birthday was approaching, and what gift to give was a problem. Ning Wangfu didn't lack anything. Li Xian had racked his brains for this matter. Gift calligraphy and paintings. Mother didn't like it. Give jewelry. Would the dignified Wang Fei lack jewelry? Rare treasures. That would have to be something. After thinking for a long time, the crown prince decided to find another way. The painting that Li Yi had drawn for him last time, he had shown it to Wang Fei like it was a treasure. At that time, Mother seemed to be very interested in the painting. If he could also draw a painting for her, he might be able to create a surprise. Since it was a surprise, he couldn't draw it in front of her. It didn't seem good to bring Li Yi to the Wang Fu to peep at his mother. He could only pick a painting from the Wang Fei's previous paintings and let Li Yi compare it to the painting. This was not difficult for Li Yi. The paintings in this world were the same as other books. He could copy them into his consciousness and draw them out without any mistakes. All he had to do was use some three-dimensional painting techniques. Li Xian's idea wasn't bad. There wasn't a woman who didn't want to keep her youth. Wang Fei wasn't young, but she wasn't even 40 yet. Adding on the fact that she took good care of herself, she only looked to be in her early 30s. If she and Ning Wang worked hard, she might be able to give Li Xian another younger brother or sister. Speaking of Wang Fei's birthday, when Li Xian invited him last time, Li Yi had agreed because he thought that he could give her a few bottles of Rui Du. Perhaps it could be promoted in the upper-class circles of Qing and Fu. However, he didn't think that Rui Du would already be popular before this. There was no need to do anything else. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have agreed so easily. After all, he didn't belong to that circle. Other than Li Xian, he didn't know anyone else. It would be awkward to go. In his opinion, lying in the yard and sunbathing was more interesting than attending the birthday. 10 taels of silver for a painting. Li Xian was an old customer, so he could get a 9% discount. After rounding it up, it was exactly 10 taels of silver. As a son, it was not enough to just give her a painting. However, other than a painting, what else could he give her? Thinking about it, Li Xian's head hurt. After going one round, it came back to Li Yi. Are we friends? Li Xian looked at Li Yi, his eyes burning. I'm just a commoner. How dare I call myself friends with your highness? Looking at his eyes, Li Yi's heart became a little vigilant. Yesterday, he gave him a bar of soap. Did he misunderstand something? One sentence interrupted Li Xian's thoughts. He didn't know what to say next. I've always thought of you as a friend. Li Xian looked at him and said bitterly, to be honest, since the first day we met, have I ever put on airs in front of you? The sudden confession made Li Yi have goosebumps all over his body. He hurriedly made a paused gesture and said, okay, leave it to me. Don't look at me like that. After Li Xian achieved his goal, he left with a satisfied face. He didn't have to worry about anything if he handed this matter to Li Yi. Encountering such a fraud, Li Yi could only shake his head and sigh that he didn't make friends carefully. In comparison, Emingzu was more reliable. She could get a free security guard just by freeloading a few meals and a few glasses of wine. It was so cost-effective. The only thing that made Li Yi a little strange was that in the past 2 days, he always felt that Emingzu sometimes looked at him with a strange expression. Thinking about it later, he always felt that something was not quite right. Chapter 147. In the back hall of Anxi County Government, County Magistrate Liu was sitting in an old-fashioned wooden armchair, leisurely enjoying fragrant tea. Drinking tea was one of his hobbies. County Magistrate Liu didn't have many hobbies. Closing the door and having fun with his concubine in the room was one of them. Next was drinking tea. The tea was good tea, which was given to him by the county magistrate a few days ago. The county magistrate was also a tea lover. County Magistrate Liu had been thinking about his treasured tea leaves for some days, but the county magistrate had been unwilling to part with them. A few days ago, after County Magistrate Zhou was taken away by the magistrate, the county magistrate seemed to have changed into a different person. Not only did he serve good tea readily, but he was also much more humble when talking to him. Having been an official for many years, County Magistrate Liu certainly knew why the county magistrate would change like this. A few days ago, County Magistrate Zhou was found to have taken bribes and used public office for personal gain. Anyway, there were a lot of crimes. He was taken back to the magistrate's office by the magistrate, and he might not have a good life in the future. In the past, these things had seemed extremely normal to them. Of all the officials in the county government, there was probably not a single one who could be described as uncorrupted and impartial. It was harmless to accept some money and make things convenient for others. As long as the matter was not blown out of proportion, even the county magistrate would turn a blind eye to it. The county magistrate had certainly done these things. The problem was that County Magistrate Zhou, who was almost the same as him, was taken away in this way. Hearing this news, the county magistrate broke into a cold sweat on the spot. If he was found, wouldn't he end up the same as County Magistrate Zhou? After being on tenterhooks for a few days, what he worried about didn't happen. Then, he was a little relieved. It seemed that County Magistrate Zhou was just a little unlucky, and it was not the higher-ups who wanted to thoroughly investigate these officials. However, although he was a little relieved, he behaved much more restrained. He didn't dare to do any secret tricks, and he kept a good relationship with the county magistrate. If there was any news from the higher-ups, he could know it immediately. Of course, County Magistrate Lu accepted the county magistrate's goodwill. At this moment, he squinted his eyes and tasted the fragrant tea. He was still thinking about what he had just done with his concubine. Suddenly, there came the sound of hurried footsteps outside the door, and a yamen runner rushed in. County Magistrate Lu raised his eyebrows. Last time County Magistrate Zhou had an accident, it was this guy who rushed in. Seeing his flustered look this time, could it be that something big had happened again? She didn't mind that he didn't knock on the door and quickly asked, "What happened?" "My lord." The runner panted heavily and said, "Someone from the front office is here. He came from the capital." "The capital?" County Magistrate Lu exclaimed. The people from the capital city did not dare to neglect and hurried to the front hall. A quarter of an hour later, County Magistrate Lu changed into his official uniform and followed two eunuchs from the palace to leave the yamen. The two of them were indeed from the capital. The imperial edict could not be faked. But they came all the way from the capital city to announce the imperial edict just to reward a small county magistrate. When did the imperial edict become so worthless? Of course, the imperial edict would not be so cheap. County Magistrate Lu had been an official for so many years, but he had only seen it twice. It should be noted that when he took office, he only held a letter of appointment in his hand. But now, a county magistrate under his command could be rewarded by His Majesty. How could he be an emperor in the future? First, there was the honorable female arrestor, whom His Excellency warned him not to offend. Later, the county magistrate was rewarded by His Majesty, who must have a powerful background. He couldn't afford to offend them. What was the point of being a county magistrate? Lead the way. Let's go to the Li family village. When they were in the yamen just now, County Magistrate Lu had investigated the soon-to-be County Magistrate Li. At this time, with a group of yamen runners, he led the two people to the Li family village to announce the imperial edict. "You don't have to go to the Li family village." A light voice came from behind. County Magistrate Lu looked back and saw a valiant figure coming out of the county office. "Prince," when the two eunuchs looked back, their faces suddenly changed and they were about to kneel down to salute. Mingzi waved her hand to them and said, "If you want to announce the imperial edict, go directly to the Rui workshop." In the Rui workshop, Li Yi was lazy again and didn't come today. In addition to the four girls, there was only Fang, who was sitting in the corner and dozing off. In his intermittent dream, he followed his son-in-law to earn money and bought a big house. There were servants to serve him in everything. After a long time of torturing the wicked woman at home, she finally allowed him to take a concubine. In his joy, he was about to welcome Miss Hong from the Jade Courtyard back home. "Who is Li Yi?" "His Majesty has an imperial edict. Kneel down and accept it." Suddenly, a loud roar woke Fang up from his dream. His body trembled. The big house was gone, the servants and maids were gone, and Miss Hong was gone. "What are you shouting for? Go to the funeral." Having his beautiful dream interrupted, old Fang was immediately enraged. He did not even see who it was before he scolded the intruder. "How dare you! How dare you!" The two fair-skinned and beardless men's faces darkened. They glared at Fang and said coldly almost at the same time. As eunuchs who delivered imperial edicts, they were fine in the palace. But outside the palace, everyone was respectful and greeted them with a smile. When had they ever been scolded like this? What did this fool say just now? Go to the funeral. He dared to say that His Majesty's imperial edict was a funeral. He was courting death. County Magistrate Lu, who was following them, also felt his eyelids twitching. Where did this fool come from? How could he say such nonsense? What? Do you still want to fight? Fang was still angry because he was woken up from his sweet dream. His eyes widened when he heard the words. He took a step forward, and a burst of momentum suddenly pressed over. Was it reasonable to disturb someone's sweet dream? Just now, these two guys seemed to call his son-in-law's name. Judging from their posture, were they here to seek revenge? With that thought in mind, the aura emanating from old Fong's body grew even stronger. The two eunuchs' faces changed. Then, they became completely cold and said loudly, "Take him down. Those who don't know are not guilty. Those who don't know are not guilty." County Magistrate Liu waved his hand hurriedly before the yamen runners came in. He looked at Fong and said, "You fool, these two are sent by His Majesty to deliver the imperial edict. Where is Li Yi? Ask him to come out to receive the imperial edict." Receive the imperial edict. Fong looked at the man in the official robe and the two eunuchs. He stood there in a daze, and his mind was blank. Several women stood beside the counter and looked over with shock in their eyes. "Where is your son-in-law?" When Fong's heart was in turmoil, a familiar voice came to his ears. At home." Fong swallowed his saliva and said with a trembling voice. Chapter 148. Compared with the Willow Leaf Village 2 or 3 months ago, the difference was like heaven and earth. Last year, there was a drought, and the already barren mountainous region had no harvest. Although the imperial court had already reduced taxes for 2 years, there were still many people struggling to feed themselves with just the amount of food they had left in their homes. However, now that he looked at it again, he could finally see some flesh on the bodies of the skinny brats who had been running all over the village. They were holding a large bone in their hands and gnawing on it. There were always 1 or 2 dogs beside them, staring at the bone in the hands of the brats and constantly walking around. The new houses of several families had been built. Their neighbors would often lend a helping hand. In the end, they would ask their wives to cook a good meal to reward their neighbors. For decades, this had been the default habit of the villagers in the stockade. Several men were chatting while working. Suddenly, they heard something coming from the entrance of the village. They looked up and were all stunned. A few silhouettes on horseback entered their line of sight. After entering the stronghold, the people on horseback dismounted unhurriedly. The few of them could clearly see a dozen or so black-clothed officials following behind them as they entered the stronghold. There had never been so many officials in the Willow Leaf Village. Several men's expressions changed slightly. Could it be that someone in the village had committed a crime and these people were here to arrest him? "Look, isn't that Fong?" One of the men saw a familiar figure walking in front and immediately said in surprise. "It's Fong. Why is Fong with the officials? What are these people doing in the village?" Several men were surprised. Seeing these people enter the village, they followed them from a distance and didn't dare to get too close. Until they found that they stopped in front of a courtyard, they couldn't help but exclaim. "Are they here for the first miss?" "No. I'm afraid they are here for the son-in-law." "Is the son-in-law?" Just as their expressions changed, more and more people began to notice the movement here. After all, the Willow Leaf Village was located in the mountains and was not connected to other villages. Usually, outsiders rarely came here. This time, there were so many people, all dressed as officials. It seemed that this matter was unusual. Fong knocked on the door. Li Yi was in the courtyard teaching Xiao Huan how to make her hair into a bun. Hearing the knock on the door, he casually said, "The door is not closed, come in." When he glanced over and saw old Fong, he could not help but be startled. What was wrong with Fong today? Why did he know to knock on the door? However, Li Yi's expression changed slightly when he saw the officers and the 2 unfamiliar men leading them. What was going on? Why were there so many officials? Could it be that old Fong had done something wrong? The little servant girl was also shocked by the situation. Her face was pale, and she hid behind Li Yi, looking at the officers nervously. Hearing the movement in front, two women walked out of the inner courtyard. Seeing the situation in front of them, Lu Rui's beautiful eyes slightly narrowed, and one hand was already holding the hilt of her sword. Lu Rui's pretty face also changed. They quickly walked to Li Yi's side. Rui turned to look at him and asked, "Husband, what are these people doing? Who is Li Yi? Come out and receive the imperial edict." The eunuch's shout caused everyone to freeze on the spot. Receive the imperial edict. Li Yi's expression changed. Receive what imperial edict? Lu's sister Rui looked at him. The eunuch's voice was not low, and the people outside the door also heard him. Everyone looked at each other, and their eyes were full of surprise and doubt. His Majesty's imperial edict, why don't you kneel and receive it? Usually, when imperial edicts were announced, many people were scared silly. The eunuch glanced at him, and did not find it strange. He said coldly. Crash. Before Li Yi knelt, County Magistrate Lu and the other officers knelt first. When the imperial edict was announced, it was as if the emperor himself had arrived. Not only did the person who received the imperial edict have to kneel, but the surrounding people also had to kneel. There was another crashing sound, and the villagers outside the door also knelt down. Although they had not seen the imperial edict, and did not understand the rules, how could they dare not to kneel when even the officers knelt? Lu Rui removed her hand from the hilt of her sword. After looking at each other, she also knelt. In the Jing kingdom, the current emperor was the most honorable person. This concept was deeply rooted in their blood. Seeing that they knelt, Xiaohuan also followed closely behind. For a moment, other than the two eunuchs, only Li Yi was still standing. He looked around, and a trace of helplessness appeared on his face. He walked in front of the two eunuchs, and knelt down, saying, "This commoner receives the imperial edict." Although he really did not want to kneel, he did not want to be accused of disrespecting the emperor. Even the imperial edict is here. Which bastard framed me? After kneeling down, he murmured in a low voice. The first person that appeared in his mind was the guy who claimed to be a professor of the prefectural school that he met a few days ago. Other than that, he really could not think of any other reason. When the eunuch heard him murmur, the corner of his mouth twitched, and he almost flew into a rage on the spot. When he thought of the princess's instructions, he suppressed his anger and read the imperial edict. Listening to the eunuch read a lot, Li Yi roughly understood the reason. It meant that the rules for disciples was meritorious and so on, and then there was a lot of praise. Before the eunuch finished, Li Yi already had an idea. Now, I can't run away from the position of a scholar. When he thought of this, the eunuch had already read to the end. You are conferred the title of Anxi County Lieutenant, and you will be blessed by the emperor forever. County Lieutenant. Li Yi suddenly raised his head, and his face was full of disbelief. Because of his meritorious service, he was conferred the title of County Lieutenant. How could this be possible? Isn't it too sudden and too big a turn? This is not common sense at all. Who on earth is framing me? County Lieutenant Li quickly received the imperial edict. Seeing him standing there in a daze, County Magistrate Lu could not help but urge him. He took the opportunity to take a few more glances at him, but he still could not believe that this young man would be the county lieutenant in the future. Can I not receive it? Li Yi looked at County Magistrate Lu and asked tentatively. It was not easy to meet a kind-looking person. Last time, he just said it casually to Mingzu. God bless him, he had never thought of being a county lieutenant. Suddenly, Li Yi seemed to think of something, and his face suddenly showed a look of understanding. Are you going to defy the imperial edict? Before County Magistrate Lu opened his mouth, a eunuch looked at him and asked with an unkind look. Can't I be an official even if I don't want to? Li Yi looked at him and said, since ancient times, there have been many people of noble character and unquestionable integrity who refuse to be an official, right? So, they are all dead. The eunuch looked at him, and a sneer appeared on his face. Chapter 149. After announcing the imperial edict, the two eccentric eunuchs walked away with sullen faces. According to the usual practice, when it came to conferring titles and increasing nobility, the person receiving the imperial edict would always prepare a small gift to express his gratitude. But looking at the current situation, the scholar who did not know what was good for him did not resist the imperial edict, which was already giving them enough face. Over the years, there were many noble and reclusive officials who resigned from their positions. The emperor was wise and magnanimous, so he had never been convicted for this, but he still felt embarrassed. Fortunately, he had listened to Her Highness. Otherwise, he might not have been able to resolve the matter today. The man in the official uniform also left. When Li Yi heard him introducing himself as the county magistrate and his future superior, he realized that he was also the father of the young man who had enmity with him. He had offended his superior before taking office. However, this was not the most important thing. Looking at the neatly folded official uniform and the official seal on it, Li Yi began to feel a little absent-minded again. Did the emperor's brain get kicked by a donkey? Didn't he just copy an article? Why did he make him a county magistrate? What a sin. If he had known this earlier, he wouldn't have copied the disciple rules. He had never thought of throwing himself into the tide of building feudalism. When he had enough money in the future, he would be able to travel when he was bored. If he became a county magistrate, he would have to manage some trivial matters all day long. Wouldn't he be tied to Anxi County? Li Yi's heart was heavy. He was inexplicably appointed an official, and he was not happy. However, the others did not think so. Fang, who was the first to know the news, was still in a daze until now. County magistrate, how did the son-in-law become a county magistrate? In the past, a county magistrate was equivalent to one of the top positions in the stronghold. In this way, it was already a high position that Fang could not imagine. Of course, apart from Fang, those who were still standing outside the door were also dumbfounded. The second aunt had just returned from the chicken coop, and the egg in her hand had already fallen to the ground and broken into pieces. She, who had always been stingy, did not notice this at all. She muttered in a trembling voice, "County Lieutenant, County Lieutenant." County Lieutenant. The expressions of the other direct descendants of the Liu family were also particularly interesting. The Willow Leaf village started with bandits. Since the establishment of the village, they had gradually transitioned from bandits to ordinary farmers. There hadn't been a scholar for decades. Suddenly, a county lieutenant appeared out of nowhere. Thinking that they would have to see the county lieutenant frequently in the future, they immediately became nervous. Upon thinking of certain things, many people started to feel slightly uneasy. After all, he had snatched it back then. Now that the weak scholar had become the county magistrate, would he come back to settle the score with them? Although they did not participate in that incident, it was hard to say whether he would vent his anger on them or not. While everyone was feeling uneasy, the sound of whispers came into the courtyard, which made people feel upset for no reason. Li Yi waved his hand at Fang and said in a low mood, "Close the door." Disperse, disperse. Fang could see that the son-in-law was in a bad mood. He shouted a few words to the people around the door, and then closed the door. He continued to look at Li Yi with a puzzled expression. The son-in-law had been made an official by the emperor, which was a great thing. But looking at him, it seemed that he had been robbed of money. Could it be that he felt that the official title was too low for him? Xiao Huan was extremely happy that the son-in-law had been made a high official. But seeing that the son-in-law did not seem to be happy, she did not say anything, but she was very happy in her heart. The son-in-law had become the county magistrate, so wouldn't Xiao Huan be the county magistrate's maid in the future? Husband, what is going on? After everyone left, the courtyard became quiet. Lu Rui looked at Li Yi, and there was still a look of surprise on her pretty face. Lu Rui also turned her head to look at him. How did a weak scholar suddenly become a county magistrate? This change was a little hard for her to accept. Would she still be able to rob his things with a clear conscience in the future? I must have been framed. Li Yi said with an ugly expression, gritting his teeth and gritting his teeth. Fong staggered. If being framed could make him a county magistrate, he would accept all the framing. In Rui's workshop, Li Yi sat at a table, drinking alone to drown his sorrows. He was thinking about how to get rid of the position of county magistrate. Slack in work, corruption, and bending the law. It would be a good idea if he could go back home and work as a farmer. But it would not be worth it if he went to jail for this. After all, this was a feudal society that did not care about human rights at all. If the emperor asked him to be an official, then he must be an official. Did the emperor ever ask for the opinions of the people involved? When is county magistrate Li going to be appointed? The position of county magistrate is very important, and it can't be left vacant for too long. Just when Li Yi was racking his brains and thinking hard, a clear and melodious voice came from outside the door. Seeing the female arrester coming in, Li Yi suddenly stood up and glared at her, asking, "Is it you? Is it you who did this?" Li Yi thought about it over and over again. He felt that no matter how big the hole in the brain of the emperor of Jing country was, it was impossible for him to just rely on a piece of rules for disciples to confer him the position of a county officer. If there was no one behind this, he would not believe it even if he was beaten to death. And arrestor Li, who had a powerful background, was his primary suspect. "You said you wanted to be the county magistrate. Why? I helped you, but you not only don't say thank you, but also blame me." Li Emingzu sat opposite him, took a wine cup, and said lightly after filling it with wine. She did not deny it, which meant she admitted it. "It's really you." Thinking that she was the one who set him up, Li Yi suddenly became furious. This ungrateful person ate his food and drank his wine, but in the end, she bit the hand that fed her. She did not care about his kindness at all, and even dug such a big hole for him to jump into. After drinking the wine in her cup, the female arrestor frowned and said, "What wine is this? It's as light as water. Where's your strong wine? Take it out quickly." Li Yi pulled the wine pot to his side and took the wine cup from her hand. He stared at her with fire in his eyes. Why the hell would she drink? There was no wine, and he didn't even give her water. The female arrestor was not angry at all. She crossed her arms, looked at him, and said lightly, "What? Didn't you say you wanted to be the county magistrate?" "Who said it?" Li Yi had only said half a sentence before he was rendered speechless. At this moment, a familiar scene appeared in his mind. What's so good about being a lowly official? There's no rank, and I'm ordered around all day. It's meaningless. If I want to be an official, I should at least be a county magistrate, or at least a county magistrate. What's the point of being an official? What's the point? What is it? The words that he said to Emingzu at that time echoed in his mind for a long time. Damn it, my mouth is so cheap. Li Yi looked up to the sky and let out a long sigh after being tricked by his strength. It's not death, it's self-destruction. If you don't seek death, you won't die. The ancients were right. Chapter 150. After figuring out the cause of the matter, Li Yi felt even more upset in his heart. Being cheated by others and being cheated by oneself were two completely different feelings. He raised his head to look at Emingzu and sighed in his heart. This girl was really honest, he was just saying it casually. Who would have thought that anyone could become a county lieutenant? Moreover, he didn't expect that this honest girl would take it so seriously. If he had known that this would be the result, he wouldn't have said that it would be a county lieutenant. At the very least, he would have been a prefectural magistrate. While he was thinking about this, Mingsu had already taken out a small unopened wine jar from the corner of the counter. She sat back at the table with satisfaction and took back the wine cup from Li Yi's hand to refill it. The cup that he drank just now was at most water wine. This scholar's alcohol tolerance was probably similar to that cheap cousin of his. You have a say in the emperor's side. Li Yi came back to his senses and didn't blame her in his heart. Sort of. Mingsu nodded as a tacit agreement. Smelling the fragrance of the wine, a trace of satisfaction flashed in her eyes and she picked up the wine cup. Li Yi looked at her and asked tentatively, "Then how about we make a deal? You don't want to be a county lieutenant, but a prefectural magistrate." Pfft. Mingsu didn't manage to swallow a mouthful of wine and spat it out. Li Yi, who was sitting right in front of her, was caught off guard. He was caught off guard and the wine was sprayed all over his face. He wiped the wine off his face and looked at her with a stiff expression. "Do you think a prefectural magistrate is a cabbage?" Even someone as calm as her couldn't help but lose her composure after hearing Li Yi's words. Not to mention a prefectural magistrate, even the appointment and dismissal of a county magistrate wasn't something she could control. Changing to a prefectural magistrate? He really dared to think. After throwing him a supercilious look, she stood up and walked outside. The position of a county lieutenant cannot be left vacant. If there's nothing else, you should report to the county government early. After walking out of the door, he turned back and picked up the wine jar, saying, "I'm taking the wine away." Li Yi stared blankly at her disappearing figure, feeling as if he had been betrayed. "I heard that you're going to be a county lieutenant." Li Xian asked in surprise as soon as he walked into the shop. "How did you know?" Li Yi sat on the chair listlessly, raised his head and glanced at him. After asking, he felt like he had asked a useless question. In Qing and Fu, what could be hidden from him? Mingsu said so. Li Xian sat opposite him and said, "Mingsu said that with your abilities, you have nothing to do anyway. It would be a pity if you don't find something to do. I didn't think that Mingsu would have such an evaluation of you." Li Xian's tone was a bit gloomy. Ever since he was young, this cousin of his had always ignored him. Not only him, but others as well. This made Li Xian feel very defeated. This was the first time he had heard her use the word capable to describe a man. He looked at Li Yi seriously and felt that there was nothing special about him. Although he was outstanding enough compared to others, compared to himself, there was still a small gap. Of course, he still had something to ask of Li Yi. He only thought these words in his heart and didn't say them out loud. "What? I have nothing to do anyway. It would be a pity if you don't find something for me to do." The expression on Li Yi's face froze. When he thought of the indifferent expression on the bailiff's face when she said these words, he couldn't help but feel a surge of anger in his heart. So she did it on purpose. When he walked in the stockade the day before, the people around him avoided him like they were avoiding the plague. Everywhere he went, people retreated. The naughty child wanted to come over and greet him but was held under the arms of the adults in the family. They quickly hid in the house and closed the door. Two pairs of eyes peeked out from the crack of the door. When he encountered someone he couldn't avoid, he would stand where he was and call out, "County Lieutenant," in a trembling voice. After that, he would run away. Even the dogs in the stockade couldn't catch up to him, other than Fong. Even the people who were close to Rui and her sister were somewhat uneasy when they saw him. It was even more difficult to explain to the family. The little servant girl was heartless and hadn't changed much from before. When she was doing things, she would sometimes secretly cover her mouth and laugh. No one knew what she was thinking. As for Rui, he couldn't tell her that the emperor was crazy and suddenly wanted to make him a county lieutenant. Last night, Li Yi rested in the shop. When he thought of how to explain it to Rui, the two of them would have a good talk. Do you still remember the psychology of women and the 36 ways to woo a girl that I mentioned last time? Li Yi looked at Li Xian and asked. Of course I remember. Li Xian nodded. This was what Li Yi promised to teach him last time, but he hadn't fulfilled it yet. I'll teach you these things now. Li Yi said with a serious face, you can go and woo the bailiff now. Since she made him worry, Li Yi certainly didn't want her to live comfortably. Now he would teach Li Xian how to woo a girl shamelessly and annoy her to death. Why do you want to woo her? Li Xian was stunned when he heard it, then he said in shock, she is my cousin. This time it was Li Yi's turn to be puzzled. Then why did you ask me to write a poem last time? I just want her to see me in a different light. Li Xian, who had been ignored since childhood, wanted to see different emotions from her as her cousin. However, this goal had been achieved a few days ago. Speaking of which, I still have to thank you. Last time, I made a bet with Mingsu. Which of the two rocks of different sizes would fall first? Thinking of her expression at that time, Li Xian couldn't help but smile. He cupped his fist and said to Li Yi. Li Yi found that he had been wrong all this time. It turned out that this guy only wanted to show off in front of Mingsu. In this world, if someone wanted to woo his cousin, his legs would still be broken. By the way, you can continue with The Psychology of Women and 36 Ways to Woo a Girl that you mentioned just now. Obviously, Li Xian was still very interested in the topic he just talked about. I forgot. Li Yi waved his hand. The idea of letting Li Xian annoy the bailiff also failed, so he immediately lost interest. After giving a few words to the girls, he started to walk out of the door. Where are you going? Li Xian asked. Li Yi didn't answer, so Li Xian hurriedly followed him. In the Anxi County Government office, Li Yi and Li Xian were stopped by the Yamen runner at the door. The Yamen runner stopped them and asked, who are you? What business do you have in the county government office? Li Yi took out his waist token and waved it in front of the Yamen runner. The Yamen runner's expression immediately changed. He bowed and said, Lord County Lieutenant. Seeing the two of them walk into the county government office, the Yamen runner patted his chest after they disappeared. That scholarly young man just now was the new Lord County Lieutenant. He was too young. Just when the Yamen runner was thinking whether the new Lord County Lieutenant was reliable, County Magistrate Liu was a little distressed in the county government office. Chapter 151. In the court, County Magistrate Liu was hearing an ordinary theft case. As a county magistrate, he was in charge of the county's government affairs, so he couldn't do everything by himself. Usually, these small cases were handled by County Lieutenant Zhou. However, County Lieutenant Zhou was still in prison, and the newly appointed County Lieutenant Li hadn't come to the county government office yet, so he could only temporarily take on the duties of County Lieutenant. These days, he was much busier than usual, and he didn't even have time to fool around with his concubine. In a county, the county magistrate was responsible for coordinating the county's government affairs. The county deputy's main duty was to assist the county magistrate in administration. The registrar was responsible for checking documents and supervising the county's administration. The county lieutenant was in charge of justice, arresting thieves, hearing cases, making judgments, and collecting taxes. He was the busiest among the four people. Now, besides the county magistrate, even the county lieutenant's affairs were all on him. How could County Magistrate Liu not be distressed? Why hasn't County Lieutenant Li come yet? At this moment, a government runner came to report that the newly appointed County Lieutenant Li had arrived. County Magistrate Liu was overjoyed and went out to greet him in person. From a distance, he saw County Lieutenant Li and a young man walking towards him. The young man was talking to County Lieutenant Li with a smile, but County Lieutenant Li was obviously not in a good mood and seemed to be too lazy to talk with him. That's child. County Magistrate Liu vaguely felt that the young man was a little familiar. When he remembered, he suddenly stopped and was stunned. County Magistrate Liu was fortunate enough to follow his lordship to Prince Ning's mansion and saw Prince Ning. Because of the special identity of Prince Ning and his handsome appearance, County Magistrate Liu had a deep impression of him, so he recognized him at a glance. Seeing the heir and the county government was enough to surprise him. Last time, County Magistrate Zhou had offended the heir, so he ended up like this. But what surprised him more was that the new County Magistrate Li actually talked and laughed with the heir, and it seemed that they had a good relationship. Looking carefully, it was not talking and laughing at all. It was obviously Prince Ning's one-sided talk, but County Lieutenant Li didn't even bother to pay attention to him. What's the background of this county lieutenant under my command? He was merely a minor 8th-rank county officer, yet he was able to be bestowed the title by the emperor himself. He even chatted with the Crown Prince of Ningguang and attracted the attention of Her Royal Highness. Yesterday, the eunuch who delivered the imperial edict had already vaguely revealed Arrestor Li's identity to him and asked him to serve him carefully. After knowing the truth, County Magistrate Liu broke out in a cold sweat on the spot. Even though he already had some guesses in his heart, the truth was even more terrifying than he had imagined. The county government already had such a great figure. Was there going to be another one today? Could it be that County Magistrate Li was also? Yes, it must be. His surname is also Li. Li is the surname of the emperor. Connecting all the things related to County Magistrate Li, County Magistrate Zhou broke into a cold sweat again. The identity of the Xiuzai of Li family village must be fake. Apart from being frightened, he was also complaining incessantly in his heart. This damned Anxi county government wasn't a blessed land. Why did all the big shots come here? Any one of their subordinates was someone he couldn't afford to offend. What was the point of being the county magistrate? Too vexed. Thinking of this, County Magistrate Liu felt like there was a ball of fire in his heart that was about to be vented. He strode over with a bright smile on his face. Your Highness, please forgive me for not welcoming you earlier. Li Xian waved his hand casually and said, Don't be so polite. I'm just here to accompany County Magistrate Li. Just do your thing and don't worry about me. He said these words casually, but County Magistrate Liu, who had been an official for many years, was shrewd and cunning. He immediately understood the meaning of the prince's words. He was telling County Magistrate Liu that he had a close relationship with County Magistrate Li and that he could do as he pleased in the future. County Magistrate Liu understood. When he looked at Li Yi, he smiled even more and said, The imperial court sympathizes with us lowly officials and allows us to delay our appointment for 1 month after we receive the appointment. County Magistrate Li, you really don't have to worry. What County Magistrate Liu said was the truth. In this dynasty, the previous dynasty, and even the dynasty before that, officials had enough time to take up their appointment after receiving the appointment letter. In order to avoid corruption and forming cliques for personal gain, since ancient times, officials were not allowed to take up their posts in their birthplace. Because of the long journey, in order to give them enough time to take up their posts, the imperial court gave them a month's time. However, County Magistrate Li's situation was a little different. His Majesty had personally conferred him the title of Anxi County Magistrate, so there was no need for him to travel long distances. Normally, he could take up his post on the same day. However, County Magistrate Liu knew that Li Yi was reluctant to take up his post and presumably didn't want to come to the Yamen so early, so he might as well do him a favor. County Magistrate Liu, who had been looking forward to Li Yi taking up his post as soon as possible, instantly changed his mind after seeing the scene just now. He didn't expect the imperial court to have such a humane system. Li Yi's mood became a little better, but only a little better. He could avoid it for a day or a month, but he couldn't avoid it for a lifetime. What was supposed to come would come back, and he couldn't run away from the position of County Magistrate Liu. At this moment, County Magistrate Liu said, I still have a case to hear. Would County Magistrate Li and Early be willing to have a look? Since he knew that he didn't have to take up his post immediately, Li Yi didn't want to stay in the yamen for a second longer. Li Xian was a little interested in this and said, "Isn't it the duty of a county magistrate to hear a case? Why don't you go and have a look?" Li Yi, who didn't want to go at first, was a little shaken after hearing his words. After being dragged to the court by Li Xian, County Magistrate Lu didn't introduce them. He ordered a yamen runner to bring 2 chairs and sat back on the main seat. Then he slammed the gavel and looked at the person kneeling down below, saying loudly, "How dare you? Someone clearly saw you steal the silver from your master, but you refuse to admit it. Do you want me to punish you?" "Your Honor, I'm wronged." The kneeling young man kowtowed a few times and said with a bitter expression, "This lowly one has been wronged. That Wang heir and this lowly one have always been at odds. It is clear that he stole the silver and framed me. This lowly one really did not steal master's silver. You're lying. Although we don't get along, it's true that I saw you steal the silver with my own eyes. Why should I frame you?" A person kneeling beside him immediately said, "Your Honor, I'm really wronged." The young man kowtowed again. County Magistrate Lu asked several times, but the 2 people insisted on their own words. However, he couldn't find other evidence, so he couldn't help feeling a headache. He began to miss County Magistrate Zhou a little. "County Magistrate Li, what do you think of this case?" He got up and walked to the court, looking at Li Yi and asking. He decided to liven up the atmosphere and ease his embarrassment. He didn't have any hope that this new county magistrate could solve the case. Not until then did the runners know that the young man who came in with County Magistrate Lu was actually the new county magistrate of this county. They were all shocked. It was said that this county magistrate was appointed by His Majesty, but they didn't expect that he looked so young. However, this county magistrate came at the right time. County Magistrate Lu obviously wanted to shift the blame. Hearing the familiar line of County Magistrate Lu, Li Yi felt that he could change his name to Li Yuanfang. He cupped his hands to County Magistrate Lu and looked at the 2 people in the court. Thinking that he would have to deal with these trivial things all day in the future, he became more agitated and his face darkened. He pointed at the young man who was accused and said loudly, "When you argued just now, you repeated your words and raised your voice, which showed that you were lying. In just a few words, you rubbed your nose 5 times, which showed that you were trying to cover up the truth. Your right thumb kept rubbing, which showed that you were panicking. Last but not least, you look shifty-eyed and ugly, which means that you are not a good person. If you didn't steal the silver, who else could it be?" Speaking of this, Li Yi's voice suddenly sank. "Guards, drag him out and behead him." Chapter 152. Guards, drag him out and behead him. Hearing Li Yi's words, the court fell into dead silence. County Magistrate Lu took advantage of the break to take a sip of tea, but he spat it all out in an instant. He turned his head abruptly and stared at Li Yi with wide eyes. Doubts, astonishment, shock, all kinds of emotions emerged in his eyes. Behead him. What gave him the confidence to say such a thing? Even the county magistrate or the magistrate didn't have the right to approve the death penalty, let alone a county lieutenant. In order to prevent indiscriminate killing, according to the law of the Jing Kingdom, the application for the death penalty should be reported to the higher levels and reviewed by the Ministry of Penalty many times. Finally, it should be signed by the emperor himself and then beheaded. How could it be so simple? Even if his identity was as he thought, he didn't have the right to give such an order. However, seeing that he said, "Drag him out and behead him," so easily with a gloomy face, County Magistrate Lu increasingly felt that his background was unfathomable. County Magistrate Lu was like this, not to mention the yamen runners in the court. When the young county lieutenant opened his mouth, they were a little confused. Repeating words and raising his voice meant that he was lying. Rubbing his nose meant that he was trying to cover up the truth. Rubbing his thumb meant that he was flustered. This method of solving a case was simply unheard of. What was more unbelievable was that he looked shifty-eyed and ugly, which meant that he was not a good person, since when was being ugly a crime? Could this county lieutenant be more sloppy in solving a case? What the county lieutenant said next confirmed their guess. It was really possible. Drag him out and behead him. Behead him. The yeoman runners smiled bitterly in their hearts. You're just a county lieutenant, not the emperor. Who gave you such a great power? Li Xian's mouth twitched mockingly when he saw the shocked expressions on everyone's faces. They were just a bunch of country bumpkins who hadn't seen the world before. Just a few words had scared them. After all, the person standing in front of them was a freak who could turn right into wrong, black into white, and the ground under his feet into a ball. A single sentence from him could make people doubt their lives. Compared to this, what did what they had just said count for? Having known Li Yi for such a long time, Li Xian had already deeply understood that there was no need to doubt anything he said. If you think what he said is wrong, there is only one possibility, and that is that you are not smart enough. In other words, his IQ was not high enough. He had just learned the word IQ from Li Yi not long ago. At this moment, the young man kneeling on the ground was dumbfounded. Beheaded, beheaded. He raised his head and glanced at the young man who had just spoken. He saw that the young man's face was serious and did not look like he was joking. He suddenly felt his vision go black and instantly collapsed to the ground. Even Wang Er, who was standing beside him, was stunned when he heard this. Was this lord serious? In the next moment, a miserable scream came from the court. Lord, please spare my life, please spare my life. The young man got up from the ground and kowtowed as if he was pounding garlic. It's all my fault. I was greedy for money. That day, I accidentally saw the place where the master hid the silver, so I had an evil intention. Yesterday, when the master was not here, I stole the silver. Now, I've buried it under the third peach tree in the backyard. I'm willing to confess everything. Lord, please spare my life. This young man was just a lowly servant. How would he know about the twists and turns of criminal law? When he heard the words, drag him out and behead him, he was completely dumbfounded. How would he dare to deny it? What was a few dozen taels of silver? If this went on, he would lose his life. It was just a few dozen taels of silver. Was it worth it? The court continued to be silent. All the yeoman runners could not help cursing in their hearts. How could it work like this? County Magistrate Liu was also extremely shocked. Glancing at Li Yi, who had recovered his calm expression, he could not figure out whether it was a fluke or a plan. If it was the latter, he would have to re-examine this county magistrate Li. The reason was that Li Yi's official position was only obtained by his background, and he would at most be a muddle-headed county magistrate. Now it seemed that he had underestimated him. Seeing the young man kowtowing as if he was pounding garlic, Li Yi felt a little bored. A few days ago, when he was basking in the sun in the yard, he read a few leisure books, such as How to Recognize Microexpressions, The Secret of Microexpressions, The FBI Teaches You to Read Minds, and so on. Originally, he was just looking for novelty, but he did not expect it to be useful here. He had thought that this young man could hold on for a while, but he did not expect that he would confess so soon. At this time, the yeoman runner's eyes on Li Yi had changed dramatically. No one thought that this young county magistrate was just a good-looking but useless embroidered pillow. Most of them were constables, and their daily duty was to chase down criminals and catch thieves. County Magistrate Zhou was lazy, so he would ask them to help with some trivial cases, and they were also good at interrogating cases by torture. This county magistrate Li was observant, and he could even notice such details as rubbing his nose and rubbing his thumb. Although they were not clear about the meaning of the actions that County Magistrate Li had just said, they were already 70% convinced after seeing the young man confess. Then, he convicted him with ugliness to disturb his mind, and the sentence, drag him out and behead him. What's more, it was a stroke of genius that made the criminal's mind completely collapse, and he confessed to the theft. Based on this alone, it could be seen that he was more powerful than County Magistrate Zhou. This young county magistrate was not simple. Hey, why did you say those things just now? Li Xian returned to his curious nature, and he asked, not caring that they were in the court. He was really curious about how Li Yi guessed that person's mind through these subtle movements. If he could learn this trick, wouldn't he be able to see through people's mind easily in the future? Not only Li Yi, but all the people present were curious about this question at this moment. In an instant, more than 10 pairs of eyes looked over. Even County Magistrate Liu was no exception. Li Yi turned to look at Li Xian. Do you really want to know? Li Xian looked at him with a faint smile, and his heart skipped a beat. He suddenly had a bad feeling. He recalled that every time Li Yi subverted his understanding, it made him doubt the world, and he could not eat or sleep well. Only by experiencing it himself could he understand the feeling. Let's talk about this in a few days. Li Xian's face turned pale, and he hurriedly shook his head and said. Thinking of those terrible experiences, the curiosity in his heart was instantly reduced by more than half. Li Yi did not explain, and the Yamen runners were very disappointed. Even though County Magistrate Liu was also curious, it was not appropriate to ask at this moment. He waved his hand, and some Yamen runners already understood and took the young man who stole the silver away. After the case was solved, before County Magistrate Liu had time to breathe a sigh of relief, a Yamen runner came from outside the door and whispered something in his ear. Lord Liu, about the arson case, shopkeeper Wu came to urge us again. Hearing that, County Magistrate Liu rubbed the area between his eyebrows and sighed in his heart. When would such days come to an end? County Magistrate Liu's eyes suddenly lit up when he glanced at County Magistrate Li. Chapter 153. County Magistrate Liu tidied up his official robe, cleared his throat, and walked to Li Yi, saying with a smile, County Magistrate Li, I really admire you for solving the case so well. If today's event is spread out, I'm afraid that our Anxi County will be much more peaceful. County Magistrate Liu was not sure about Li Yi's character when he met him for the second time. However, as long as one was a human being, he would like to listen to flattery. A flattery could always shorten the distance between them. Lord Liu, you flatter me. After all, County Magistrate Liu was his superior, so Li Yi couldn't always put on airs. Therefore, he cupped his hands with a smile and said very modestly. County Magistrate Liu was a bit flattered when he suddenly showed a smile. He thought that County Magistrate Li didn't seem to be like those rich playboys, so he couldn't help but feel slightly happy and said, there is still an important case to be solved. If County Magistrate Li has nothing to do, why don't you sit down and continue to watch? You can also give me some advice when necessary. County Magistrate Liu's words were very polite. If the person in front of him was County Magistrate Zhou, he would probably casually say, Old Zhou, I have something important to deal with. This case will be handed over to you. You are not allowed to go home for dinner if you don't finish the sentence. Then, he would go to the back hall to taste tea and have fun with his concubine. He had been a county magistrate for so many years, and this period was the most aggrieved time for him. Fortunately, Li Yi was not an insensible person. In the future, they would meet each other frequently in the same county government, so he had to build a good relationship with County Magistrate Liu. After all, nominally, County Magistrate Liu was the boss here. This is my duty. It's good for me to get familiar with it in advance. If I can help you, it will be better. Li Yi smiled and sat on his seat again. County Magistrate Liu nodded and felt very comforted. Then, he sat back in the hall and slammed the gavel again. Bring the criminal. The young prince, Li Xian, who was sitting next to Li Yi, turned his head to look at him from time to time. He really wanted to learn how to read people's minds, but he was worried that if Li Yi opened his mouth, he would suffer for a few days again. He was in a dilemma. At this time, Li Yi's heart was depressed. A few days ago, he had read a lot of books on microexpressions and FBI investigation, and now he had to use them so soon. Could it be that all of this was predestined? A moment later, a middle-aged man was escorted into the hall. After he was asked to kneel in the hall, he announced loudly, "Sir, the criminal is here." County Magistrate Liu slammed the gavel and said loudly, "Xiao Fang, County Magistrate Liu, Magistrate Liu, I'm asking you again." Magistrate Fang, Magistrate Liu is Magistrate Liu. Half a month ago, the splendid cloth shop in the city was burned down. Although there were no casualties, all the cloth in the shop was burned. Shopkeeper Wu, the owner of the shop, suffered a heavy loss. After many investigations, the suspect was finally identified as the shopkeeper of another shop not far from the splendid cloth shop. The two shops were not far from each other, so they naturally had a competitive relationship. Not long ago, the splendid cloth shop developed a new type of cloth that was very popular in Qing and Prefecture. The shop's doorstep was almost trampled flat by customers. The other shop was naturally deserted. They watched as someone else made a fortune. Their feelings were probably no different from Magistrate Liu, who saw Magistrate Zhou suddenly become the magistrate. Jealousy was a scary thing. They were both cloth sellers. Why did your shop's business have to be better than mine? Furthermore, the two of them had quite a bit of personal grudge between them. Thus, on a quiet, moonless night, shopkeeper Zhao stealthily came to the entrance of the splendid cloth shop and set it on fire. Then, he also set it on fire. Shopkeeper Zhao was set on fire, but Magistrate Liu was worried. This case was neither big nor small. Logically speaking, both of them were merchants with low status. Magistrate Liu did not have to worry about handling this case. However, the shopkeeper of the splendid cloth shop was the judge. In this case, Magistrate Liu had to consider it carefully. Although Xiao Fang was the most suspicious, the evidence was not conclusive. Some heavy punishments, non-murder cases, or other serious cases could not be used. If such torture tools were to be used, they must be reported to their superiors and the brand must be verified. Moreover, they could not use it on the same criminal more than twice. Otherwise, it would be considered torture to extort a confession. A few days ago, His Excellency had personally sent someone to the county yamen to inform them that the court meeting was approaching. This was also the time when the imperial censors were most active. These censors had nothing to do, so they wandered the streets and learned about the government from the commoners. They wanted to get hold of the officials' weaknesses. If they used torture improperly and were labeled as cruel officials, it would damage His Excellency's achievements. Then, as the county magistrate, he would not have a good time next year. "Your Excellency, I'm innocent," Xiao Fang said unhurriedly. "I didn't set the fire, I'm innocent." The result was the same as before. Magistrate Liu was enraged when he saw Xiao Fang's calm expression. He snapped, "How dare you? Do you really think I don't dare to use torture on you?" Xiao Fang knelt in front of the court and remained silent. He thought to himself, so what if I have to torture him? It's nothing to suffer a little pain. However, if I'm convicted of arson, I'll be punished severely. Magistrate Liu picked up a red stick and was about to throw it at Xiao Fang. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. He immediately waved his hand and the stick fell to the ground. He then said coldly, "The criminal, Xiao Fang, set the fire without any reason. The evidence is conclusive, but he still dares to deny it. Men, drag him out and behead him." The runners were startled when they heard the explanation. They glanced at Magistrate Liu, then at Li Yi. The magistrate was applying what he had learned on the spot. Li Xian curled his lips. It was interesting to see something like this happen the first time, but it was boring the second time. Li Yi was startled too, but he found the magistrate to be interesting. Zhao Fang's expression changed when he heard the words drag him out and behead him. He was about to say something, but when he raised his head and saw the expressions on the runners' faces, his heart skipped a beat. He knew that the magistrate was trying to intimidate him. A magistrate did not have the authority to decide the life and death of a person. He straightened his body and said in a clear voice, "Sir, even if you behead me, I didn't set the fire." His attitude was as if he had been wronged, and would rather die than surrender. Magistrate Liu's expression froze. He was startled for a moment, before he could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. Why did the same trick work so well when County Magistrate Li used it just now? Why did the man kowtow and confess? But it didn't work at all when it came to him. Is he looking down on me, Magistrate Liu? Magistrate Liu became even more furious when he saw the runners around him could not help but laugh. Just as he was about to execute the punishment, Magistrate Li slowly rose from his seat and brought his fists together, before he said, "A human life is at stake. Sir, I'm afraid it's inappropriate." Chapter 154. County Magistrate Liu was overjoyed after being interrupted by Li Yi. He had really lost his mind due to Zhao Fang's anger. If he were to throw a stick at him, it would be fine if he was the one who started the fire, but if he were to blame the wrong person, there would be a bunch of imperial censors waiting for him. Perhaps because of such a small matter, His Majesty happened to be in a bad mood, and he, County Magistrate Liu, would have to pack up and leave. "What do you think, County Magistrate Li?" County Magistrate Liu withdrew his hand from the stick and said with a smile. "A human life is more important than anything else. Everyone only has one life, so we shouldn't make a rash decision." Li Yi rose from his chair and said. Zhao Fang was overjoyed hearing this. The young man's words were extremely reasonable. It would be best if he could be exempted from the punishment too. "You're right, County Magistrate Li." County Magistrate Liu nodded with a confused look, as he had no idea what Li Yi was trying to say. "I've heard of a punishment called the ant punishment. It involves stripping the criminal's clothes and smearing honey all over his body, before placing a few ant nests next to the criminal. The ants are fond of sweetness, thus they would crawl all over the criminal's body. Even if they were bitten, they would not leave any wounds. Why don't you try it?" Li Yi said with a smile, but in the eyes of the bailiffs, his smile looked like that of a devil. The mere thought of the scene made them feel uncomfortable, as if countless ants were crawling all over their bodies. Some of them even reached out their hands to grab the ants. Li Xian's eyes were filled with terror too. The scene described by Li Yi was too intense, causing him to subconsciously glance at the ground. When he saw a few ants crawling under his feet, he immediately raised his legs and moved away from them. County Magistrate Liu secretly swallowed his saliva, causing goosebumps to rise on his skin as he recalled a certain scene. Ant punishment. After hearing the young man's words, Zhao Fang, who was kneeling on the ground, could not help but shiver, as cold sweat ran down his back. What he hated the most in his life was to see things that were densely packed together. Just the thought of ants crawling all over his body made him feel worse than death. His body no longer had the strength to support itself, and he collapsed on the floor. "Milord, this lowly one has confessed, this lowly one has confessed, this lowly one was the one who started the fire, this lowly one was the one who started it." Frightened by a certain scene in his mind, shopkeeper Zhao collapsed to the ground. His face was pale and his eyes were filled with terror. Even his voice was weak. Looking at that guy lying there like a pile of mud, Li Yi was a little surprised. "This is just an ordinary ant. Don't you see those reality TV games in the future? A cute girl dares to crawl into a box full of snakes, insects, rats, and ants all by herself. Compared to that, what does this count as? Looking at this fellow's face that was as pale as a piece of paper, he looked like he was about to die from fright. Did he have a phobia of ants? The mud-like shopkeeper Zhao was dragged away. The bailiffs looked at Li Yi with admiration. They looked at each other and suddenly bowed at the same time. County Lieutenant is mighty. By now, they had put away all the contempt in their hearts for this young county lieutenant. There was no need for torture, no need to extort a confession. Just a few words were enough to make a suspect confess to his crimes. Not to mention the Anxi County Yamen, even in the entire Qing and prefecture, or even the entire Jing state, who could do this? Following such a county lieutenant, would there be any case they couldn't solve in the future? Even before he officially took office, Li Yi had already convinced all the bailiffs and bailiffs based on what happened today. Of course, County Magistrate Liu was also convinced. After witnessing County Lieutenant Li's ability with his own eyes, he would be much more at ease about the security of the county in the future. Previously, he was worried that His Majesty would force a playboy from the royal family into the county government, but now this worry was completely dispelled. Li Yi didn't come to the county government to solve cases. Since County Magistrate Liu said he could have a month's vacation, wouldn't it be a waste of the good intentions of the imperial court if he came to work so early? After exchanging greetings with County Magistrate Liu, Li Yi took the opportunity to say goodbye, ready to enjoy his 1 month's vacation. County Magistrate Liu said with a smile that he didn't need to hurry to take office. Although it was against his will, he could only work hard for a month at most, which was far less important than selling a favor to County Lieutenant Li. Phew, I'm finally out. In a room in the county government, a young man pushed the door open and came out, letting out a long sigh of relief. After being inexplicably grounded by his father for so long, the young man surnamed Liu was in a good mood today as he could finally come out for a breath of fresh air. Recently, there was something wrong with his father, who was always venting his anger on him for no reason. The young man surnamed Liu decided to stay far away from his father when he saw him, lest he got into trouble again. When he came out from the back office, he happened to see a person coming out from the front hall. The moment he saw the young scholar, a trace of astonishment appeared on the young man surnamed Liu's face, followed by ecstasy. There was a way to heaven, but you didn't take it, but broke into hell. Unexpectedly, he met this guy in the county government who had ruined his plan and beat him up. Could it be that this guy had been sued? Ha! The young man surnamed Liu laughed wildly, strode over, pointed at the scholar, and said sarcastically, "You didn't expect that one day you would fall into my hands, did you?" Seeing that the scholar was stunned as if he was scared, the young man surnamed Liu felt even more comfortable. When he was about to call for a servant, he suddenly heard an extremely gloomy voice. "Fall into whose hands?" A foot wearing an official's boots suddenly poked out from the hole. The youth surnamed Liu, who was standing at the door, was not prepared and was kicked in the buttocks. He staggered and almost fell down the corridor. After he steadied himself, he turned his head and roared, "Which son of a bitch dares to kick me?" "Dad!" The young man surnamed Liu's face turned pale and he was scared out of his wits. "Unfilial son, what did you just say?" County Magistrate Liu's face was as black as the bottom of a pot, and he said in a cold voice, "Dad, I don't know." The young man surnamed Liu's voice trembled. Before he finished speaking, County Magistrate Liu waved his hand and ordered a servant, "Take this unfilial son back to his room and put him in confinement for 3 months. He is not allowed to step out of the room without my permission." Hearing this, the young man surnamed Liu only felt that his vision went black. If it weren't for the servant who saw that the situation was not good and held him up, he would have been unable to stand. 3 months of confinement, this was killing him. He looked at the young scholar, trembling. Even a fool would know that the reason why his father was angry was all because of him. Who on earth was this scholar? After the young man surnamed Liu was taken away by the servant, County Magistrate Liu said apologetically, "County Magistrate Li, I'm really sorry. My son is naughty and mischievous and offended County Magistrate Li. I hope you don't take it to heart." At this time, County Magistrate Liu was anxious. This unfilial son caused trouble everywhere. Today, he actually dared to speak arrogantly in front of the prince. After sending County Magistrate Li away, he must teach him a good lesson. If this unfilial son didn't repent, sooner or later, he would become like County Magistrate Zhou's brother-in-law and make a big mess for him. Chapter 155. Seeing County Magistrate Li and his son leave, County Magistrate Liu's face darkened again. This unfilial son. With a cold snort, he walked to the back hall of the county government angrily. In order not to follow the footsteps of County Magistrate Zhou, it was time to teach this unfilial son a lesson. "Come and get the family punishment," County Magistrate Liu said in a cold voice, and then a runner trotted away immediately. As a trusted follower of County Magistrate Liu, he was familiar with these things. The county magistrate liked to teach his son a lesson when the weather was good, but he had never been so angry like today. Seeing County Magistrate Liu's face before he left, he observed a moment of silence for his young master in his heart. This time, the county magistrate was going to do it for real. After a while, a miserable voice came from a yard in the back hall of the county government. "Father, I know I was wrong. Father, I dare not do it again. Don't hit me. It hurts." The young man surnamed Liu was lying on a bench, and his whole body was tied up tightly. County Magistrate Liu held a bamboo stick in his hand and whipped his buttocks fiercely. "I have a small leather whip in my hand, and I whip his buttocks." In the Willow Leaf Village, the little maid was humming the song that the son-in-law taught her. She washed Li Yi's cyan official uniform with soap and hung it in the yard. The cloth was thin, and the weather was good today, so it could be dried in the evening, waiting for the son-in-law to wear it when he came back. Why hasn't the son-in-law come back yet? Sitting in the yard, the little maid habitually held her cheek in her hand and looked at the door, murmuring to herself. The son-in-law did not return to the village last night, and he might have slept in the shop. She hadn't seen him yet, so she was a little worried. Looking at the door blankly, she gradually held her cheek with both hands, and suddenly thought of a story that the son-in-law once told. It was said that a long time ago, there was a woman. Since her husband joined the army, she stood on the North Mountain and looked forward to her husband's return every day. After a long time, she turned into a stone, which was called Looking Husband Stone. She began to imagine that if Xiao Huan kept looking like this, would she turn into a stone? If the son-in-law came back and saw that she had turned into stone, would he be sad? Xiao Huan turned into a stone, would son-in-law cry? If son-in-law's tears fell on the stone she turned into, she should be able to come back to life. That was how the story went. The autumn sun was warm but not glaring. A gentle breeze blew past and the little maid's face was flushed red. After looking in one direction for a long time, she gradually felt sleepy. The son-in-law's chair was very comfortable. Her little body was curled up in it and her eyes were still looking out the door. However, not long after, she gradually closed her eyes and the sound of even breathing could be heard. "I say, just admit it. Just sign your name honestly, so that you don't have to suffer the torture. Why do you have to do this?" The head of the county government said with a bitter face, looking at the man who was tied to the rack with ragged clothes and scars on his face. "Pa! You want me to sign my name? Dream on." The ugly man sneered and spat out a mouthful of saliva. If the jailer hadn't dodged in time, he would have been spat on. "Damn it, you refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. Whip him." The head of the prison stood up angrily and shouted at the two jailers beside him. "Ha, whip him hard. When I killed my whole family, I didn't even frown." You. The man sneered and didn't hide his disdain for them. He said sarcastically, if it weren't for that woman, you wouldn't be able to catch me. If I can get out, I will slaughter that woman's whole family. When he said, that woman, the ugly man's expression became more ferocious and there was a little fear on his face. Whip him. Whip him hard. The head of the prison waved his hand angrily. Although he knew that whipping was nothing to this fierce man, at least it was a relief. The longer this guy didn't sign his name, the more tired they would be. However, almost all the punishments had been used, but they still couldn't make him confess. The county magistrate had given him a death order. If he didn't confess within 3 days, he, the head of the prison, would go home and farm. The jailer whipped him a few times, but there was no expression on the ugly man's face. At this moment, a voice came from behind. He still hasn't confessed. Hearing this voice, the head of the prison trembled. He hurriedly turned around and said flatteringly, Lord Liu, this guy is very stubborn. He won't confess no matter what. County Magistrate Liu frowned. This man was a heinous murderer who had killed several people. The evidence was conclusive. It was only a matter of time before he was sentenced. However, if he didn't sign his name and confess, wouldn't it show that he was incompetent when the Ministry of Justice arrested him? At this moment, a runner behind County Magistrate Liu took a step forward and said in a low voice, Lord, I might have a way to make the prisoner confess. Oh. What way do you have? Try it for now. County Magistrate Liu said to the runner. He was desperate. The runner took a deep breath. He knew that this might be his chance to show off in front of County Magistrate Liu. He turned to another runner and said, Daniel, take out the aphrodisiac you've hidden. The runner was stunned. Then his face turned red. He glared at him and said, Who's hiding aphrodisiac? Lord, don't listen to his nonsense. Of course, he couldn't admit that he had hidden aphrodisiac. Otherwise, wouldn't it be equivalent to admitting that he was incompetent in front of so many people? All right. Everyone knows what you've done. Don't be so wishy-washy. Take it out quickly. Don't let Lord Liu wait for too long. The runner didn't listen to his explanation at all and urged him. The tall runner opened his mouth but didn't say anything in the end. He obediently took out a bag of powder from his pocket. What are you doing with the aphrodisiac? Are you looking for a xiaonyang to make me feel good? The government runner didn't deliberately lower his voice when he spoke. The ugly man laughed impudently and said in a mocking tone. The runner didn't pay attention to him at all. He was thinking of the scene where County Magistrate Li solved 2 cases in a row in the court with ease. He couldn't help showing deep admiration in his eyes. After seeing County Magistrate Li's way of solving cases, the runner was greatly enlightened. He seemed to feel that a new world was slowly opening to him. What do you want it for? County Magistrate Liu frowned and looked at him. He didn't know what the aphrodisiac had to do with making this man confess. However, he was thinking that he should find a chance to ask Daniel where he bought the medicine. Recently, he seemed to be a bit uncomfortable under the bed. The runner glanced at the ugly man and said, Lord, I know some people who like to have sex with men. Think about it. If they take this medicine, he changed his tone and looked at the ugly man again. He opened his mouth and said, in this way, there won't be any wounds left. Besides, strong men like you seem to be their favorite. When the runner said this, the sneer on the ugly man's face had already disappeared. What appeared on his face was endless fear. Chapter 156. Not only the ugly man, but also County Magistrate Liu, the jailers, and the head of the prison. After hearing the words, a certain part of their body involuntarily tightened. A certain picture flashed in their mind, and they dared not to imagine it again. A gentleman prefers death to humiliation. Give me a quick death if you have the guts. The ugly man's facial muscles trembled as he roared. Obviously, the words of the runner just now had a great impact on him. To him, even death was 1,000, no, 10,000 times better than this humiliation. As long as he thought of that scene in his mind, he shivered all over and shuddered with fear. Don't talk. He had just started, but he was interrupted by the criminal. The runner waved his hand impatiently and continued to say to County Magistrate Liu, "Your Honor, if this method doesn't work, I have other ways. For example, we can find some male dogs in heat and feed the criminal with the aphrodisiac." You, as a civil official, County Magistrate Liu had never heard of such a scene. He tried not to think about the scene described by the runner, but the more he tried to ignore it, the clearer the scene became in his mind. Suddenly, his stomach turned upside down, and he couldn't stop retching with his hands on the table. Not only County Magistrate Liu, but also the jailers in the county government prison turned pale after hearing these words. How on earth did he come up with such an inhumane punishment? It was a waste of talent that this guy didn't work as a jailer. The runner who came up with the idea was also complacent at this time. He seemed to have regarded County Magistrate Li, whom he had only met once, as his life mentor. What would Li Yi feel if he knew that he had such an admirer? He would probably kick this disgusting guy to death. I'm a dignified man. How could I be insulted like this? You'll die a horrible death. If the bailiff's first words had only caused the fierce man to feel some fear, then his second words had already caused the ugly man to be on the verge of collapse. If it wasn't for the fact that he still had a breath left to hold on, he would have long since knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. For him, being stabbed by a sword or saber was nothing more than a frown. But if he was subjected to that kind of torture as the runner said, he would probably live in the endless shadow for the rest of his life. Shut up. Being interrupted for the second time, the local government runner was a little angry. After scolding him, he ran to County Magistrate Liu, who had just recovered and was stroking his chest, and said again, "If this method doesn't work, I have another idea. We can. Blarg. Blarg." This time, County Magistrate Liu was not the only one who retched. Even the jailers who usually tortured the prisoners couldn't help but retch while leaning against the wall. The two bailiffs on duty at the entrance of the county jail suddenly heard a shrill scream coming from within the jail. Their bodies involuntarily trembled, but they quickly returned to normal after looking at each other. As guards of the county prison, they were already used to this kind of situation. County Magistrate Liu had just brought people in. He was probably torturing the villains who had slaughtered the whole family and refused to confess. After a while, County Magistrate Liu walked out of the prison with a pale face but an unconcealable joy. "However, you've done very well today." County Magistrate Liu patted the shoulder of the local government runner, and said a word of praise while resisting the urge to vomit. I was also inspired by County Magistrate Li. The local government runner was not arrogant, but said very modestly, "Go to the back office to get the reward yourself." County Magistrate Liu nodded and said, "Thank you, sir." Seeing the local government runner go to the back office with a smile on his face and a black dog running in front of him, County Magistrate Liu seemed to think of something, and his face immediately turned pale. Blarg. At the entrance of the county jail, the two guards on duty looked at County Magistrate Liu, who was holding the wall and retching for no reason as if he was having a stroke. "Boss, you didn't see it." At that time, County Magistrate Li shouted with a cold face, "Come on, drag him out and behead him." The servant who stole the silver was so scared that he collapsed in the court and confessed to his crime. County Magistrate Li is really amazing. That crafty servant just rubbed his nose and County Magistrate Li could tell that he was lying as if he could see through his mind. If we have 10% of County Magistrate Li's ability, what case can't we solve? Also, the punishment proposed by County Magistrate Li, where ants crawled all over his body. Just thinking about it makes me itch all over. If it was really carried out, I'm afraid that the person would be tortured to madness. But County Magistrate Li just wanted to scare him. Zhao Feng was so scared that his face turned pale and he confessed on the spot. On the street of the prefectural city, a constable was narrating to the female constable what he saw in the court just now with his saliva flying everywhere. His words were full of praise for County Magistrate Li whom he met for the first time. In the end, he said with great pity, "Boss, you were patrolling the street at that time, so you didn't see the scene of County Magistrate Li's invincible power. What a pity." Li Mingzhu slightly distanced herself from the bailiff, avoiding his splattering saliva. She folded her arms in front of her chest and listened to his story with great interest. She really didn't misjudge him. This scholar was actually able to make these bailiffs trust him so much in such a short period of time. He must have some skills that she didn't know about. Such a capable person should be used by the country. How could he live in a small shop all day long? Also, in the future, his skill of judging people must be promoted by the Ministry of Justice in all the yamens. It can greatly reduce the need for torture and interrogation, which will be of great help in handling cases. Oh, when I see him tomorrow, I'll ask him why 2 stones, one big and one small, fell to the ground at the same time. Walking leisurely in the village, 2 figures walked toward him. One was a 7 or 8-year-old naughty child, who bowed respectfully and said, "Hello, sir." When the man came closer, he realized that it was Li Yi. He slapped the naughty child's head and said angrily, "Don't call me sir in the future. Call me County Lieutenant." The naughty child nodded as if he understood. Before the man spoke again, Li Yi waved his hand and walked in the direction of his home. Before he could reach the door, a stooped figure walked out from the courtyard. When second granduncle saw Li Yi, a smile appeared on his wrinkled face. "Not bad. I didn't expect to see an official in the stockade village in my lifetime. Not bad, little boy. You've got a promising future." Not only did second granduncle have bad hearing, but his mind was also getting muddled. He was an outsider, how could he be a member of Willow Leaf Village? Time waited for no man. He was getting old and might not be far from Alzheimer's. Li Yi sighed in his heart and saluted as a junior. When he opened the courtyard door and walked in, he saw a small figure curled up on a rocking chair in the courtyard, sleeping soundly. Chapter 157. The little maidservant fell asleep on the rocking chair. Although it was not yet winter, it was still a little chilly in the afternoon of autumn when the sun gradually set in the west. Her thin and delicate body was curled up in the chair and her delicate brows were slightly furrowed. She probably felt a little chilly in her sleep. Li Yi shook his head and took off his outer robe to cover her body. Xiao Huan's furrowed brows gradually relaxed. Through the arched door between the inner and outer courtyards, he could see a graceful figure. She did not return to her room to change into another robe. She walked to the arched door and looked over. The woman in white danced with the wind. Her posture was graceful. From afar, there seemed to be a faint sense of transcendence. She was like a fairy in the clouds that would be gone with the wind in the next moment. Li Yi had to admit that after these days, her Tai Chi had become more proficient than his. "Husband, you're back. Have you eaten?" Lu Rui had actually noticed Li Yi's appearance a long time ago. However, she could not interrupt him when she was practicing. After she stopped, she turned around and said, "If not, I'll do it now." Li Yi touched his stomach subconsciously. Because he was in a bad mood, he really did not eat today. "Husband, please wait for a moment. I'll do it now." Lu Rui already understood. She smiled and walked in the direction of the kitchen. Not long after, Li Yi held a bowl of noodles and wolfed it down. He did not realize it before, but after Rui mentioned it, he felt unbearably hungry and the bowl of noodles was quickly emptied. Xiao Huan washed your official robe just now. It will probably be dry at night. Remember to bring it when you go down the mountain tomorrow. Husband doesn't know how to use a saber, so you probably won't be able to use it. However, you still have to carry it with you. It will be of some use eventually. Also, it's best if husband learns a set of saber techniques. It's somewhat dangerous to hunt down bandits. Some bandits are from the underworld and are skilled in martial arts. Husband, you must be careful when you're on a mission. Lu Rui said softly while Li Yi was eating. Since Rui has nothing to do at home, why don't we let her stay by my husband's side? Even if we really meet a Greenwood tyrant, she'll be able to handle it. Although the position of a county lieutenant was a little more dangerous than other officials, it wasn't that exaggerated. If catching a thief could put one's life in danger, the former county lieutenant would have died many times. Although these matters were under the jurisdiction of the county magistrate, the actual executors were the constables. At that time, he would throw everything to Li Mingsu. No matter if she was a princess or a princess, she should be prepared to be tricked by herself. Li Yi shook his head and said, "There's no need. I don't know how long this county lieutenant can last. Forget it, let's not talk about this. Let's go out and take a walk." Of course, he was not the least bit interested in being forced to do something. He wondered how long it would take for his superiors to remove him from his position if he became a county magistrate who did nothing and took his salary. This was a safer method that Li Yi thought of on his way back. He wouldn't go to jail and could completely get rid of this burden. As the two of them walked out of the courtyard, their silhouettes gradually disappeared into the distance. At the same time, a young man walked out from the house next door. Looking at their disappearing silhouettes, his face darkened. He punched the wall, causing dust to fall down. Autumn was getting stronger, and the leaves on the trees began to fall. The somber atmosphere became even more intense in the afternoon. My husband doesn't seem to like being an official. The two of them walked on a small path behind the village. They were already some distance away from the village, and there was a gurgling stream on the side. Lu Rui said softly. "That's right." Li Yi sighed and said, "What's so good about being an official? It's not as free as it is now. I was thinking that when I have time in the future, I'll go out and explore the Jianghu. That way, I won't have wasted my time in this world. Now, I can only think about it, your mind is not in the court but in the Jianghu. My husband really doesn't look like a scholar." Lu Rui looked at him and said with a smile. "The Jianghu is so interesting, much more interesting than the court." In fact, Li Yi still had a little hope of becoming a hero of the generation. Wearing fresh clothes and riding a horse, traveling to the ends of the world with a sword, just like the heroes in the novels. Which hero would stay in the county government all day long? Lu Rui just smiled and said, "Husband, don't be deceived by those stories. There are no heroes in Jianghu. How can a group of uncivilized people call themselves heroes? They commit murder and arson, and there are countless people who deceive the world to gain fame." I see, the Jianghu in this world seemed to be a little different, but the fire in Li Yi's heart was not extinguished. The two of them walked to the end of the path and were about to turn back. Lu Rui pointed to a stone tablet in the field and said, "That's the grave of my parents." Only then did Li Yi notice that there were many stone tablets like this in the open space. He could vaguely see the words carved on the stone tablet closest to him. Li Yi guessed in his heart, is this the ancestral grave of the Liu family? Since they passed by the graveyard of his father-in-law and mother-in-law, it was a little inappropriate to pay their respects. Today was not a special day, and they just passed by. They didn't prepare anything and simply paid their respects. When they walked back, Lu Rui rarely talked about the things of the previous generation. "In my grandfather's generation, the stockade was not like what it is now. The troubled times had just ended. Although the stockade was disbanded, the habits didn't change. I heard that when my father and mother got married, there was no order from parents or matchmakers at all. My grandfather asked people to put down the betrothal gifts in the family's home, and then they took the bride and left. Now, when talking about things like kidnapping, she didn't need to avoid anything. I don't know what my parents were like at the beginning, but later, they lived like this. Only then did Lee know that kidnapping the bride was the tradition of the Liu family. In this way, he just happened to be in time. Along the way, they talked about some trivial things. Li was a little surprised in his heart. Until now, she didn't even ask what was going on with this inexplicable county lieutenant. It seemed that she had accepted it. This made him have no chance to say the explanation he had prepared. It was windy outside. When they walked to the door, Lu Ri came over to help him tidy up his clothes and said, "My husband inexplicably became a county lieutenant, and I was also very surprised. Later, I thought that if my husband really became a county lieutenant, I would be the county lieutenant's wife in the future, wouldn't I?" Speaking of this, even she couldn't help laughing. Li was stunned. After a long time, he turned to look at her and made a fist and palm salute with a strange expression. "County lieutenant's wife, I'm sorry, you're welcome. You're welcome." She imitated the way people in Jianghu and made a fist and palm salute with a smile on her face. Chapter 158. What did you say? Who confessed? In a dark room in the commoner's residential area in the northern district of Qing and Prefecture, a burly figure slammed the table, his face full of disbelief. "I bribed a bailiff from the county government. He said that who confessed a few days ago and was taken away by the Ministry of Justice yesterday," another person sitting next to him said in a low voice. "With the crimes he has committed, I'm afraid he won't be able to get out once he enters the Ministry of Justice." The burly figure stood up, and an oppressive aura suddenly exploded. The expressions of the people in the room changed slightly. With Ahu's character, how could he? One of them said with a look of pity, shaking his head. If he was in the county government, they could think of a way to save him. But if he was in the Ministry of Justice, he would be in a land of death with no hope of ever seeing the light of day again. This sudden incident had completely disrupted their plans, causing all the preparations that they had made these days to fall short of success. Humph. If it weren't for that woman, how could Ahu have been caught? A gloomy voice sounded in the room. If it were only those useless people in the yamen, I could kill them all with one hand. Although it wasn't that woman who did it herself, who was ruined by her. We have to avenge him. Another voice sounded in the room. After a short moment, the gloomy voice said angrily, "Are we unable to do anything to that woman with just us brothers? Why don't we take advantage of the darkness of the night to kill our way to her door and slaughter her entire family? It can be considered as taking revenge for Ahu." "I agree. I have no objections either." The rest of the people in the room agreed with this suggestion. The people of the Greenwood Forest had always acted according to their whims. To them, human lives were like grass. Every one of them carried at least one life on their shoulders. "All of you, shut up." Seeing that the room had become noisy, the burly figure suddenly shouted angrily. Only then did everyone quiet down. "Although that woman is hateful, her martial arts are really good. Last time, my brothers and I joined forces to ambush her, but we only slightly injured her. In the end, Ahu was still captured by her and handed over to the yamen. Even if we go to her now, we probably won't get anything out of it. Besides, who knows if she has any helpers? We can't act rashly. Big brother is right." A man stood up and said, "You haven't fought with that woman, so you don't know how terrifying she is. If you act rashly, I'm afraid you'll follow in Ahu's footsteps." When he said this, His face was filled with a strong sense of fear. He had fought with the woman before. Several of his brothers had besieged her, but in the end, she had defeated one of them. The rest of them could only retreat temporarily. The woman was young, but her martial arts were extremely high. If they continued to fight with her, Ahu would not be the only one who had been defeated last time. Are we just going to let this go? One of them said indignantly. At this moment, the burly figure spoke again. We must avenge Ahu, but this matter must be considered at length. That woman has been working for the Yamen for the past 2 years and has offended many heroes of the underworld. Who knows how many people want her dead? If we can form an alliance with them, this matter will be greatly feasible. This is a brilliant plan. Big Brother is right. I need to find those who have a grudge against that woman first. There's no hurry for this. There's a more urgent matter at hand. A few days ago, we were discovered by a female constable on the street. That person's martial arts is very powerful, and it wasn't easy for us to escape from her. I think our traces have been targeted by the Yamen. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, it's better to leave the city and lie low. As the burly man spoke, the voices in the dark room gradually quieted down. What? This is the gift you were talking about. Li Xian held a small porcelain bottle in his hand, and his voice was raised an octave higher than usual. Seeing that Li Yi nodded, a trace of black lines appeared on his face. Isn't this just Ruidu? The prince's mansion has as much as you want, and even the servants in the mansion have a bottle each. You want me to give this to mother? Li Xian somewhat regretted handing this matter to Li Yi, and he didn't pay attention to it anymore. He didn't expect that he would be so unreliable this time. That painting was not bad, but this Ruidu. Could he be a little more careful? If he had known that this would be the result, it would have been better for him to search during this period of time to see if there were any rare treasures. It was better than stupidly holding a bottle of Ruidu when the time came. Li Yi also didn't bother to explain to him. Because he didn't have time to customize a new porcelain bottle, he used the packaging of Ruidu. However, it contained the first batch of perfume that he had successfully tested. There weren't many flowers that bloomed in autumn, and there were even fewer that could be used to make perfume. After he finally found all the materials and made the perfume according to the book, he found that the fragrance would dissipate very quickly and wouldn't last long. Later, he looked up a lot of information and finally found something called a fragrance retention agent in a corner. After adding musk ingredients, it wasn't until 2 days ago that the real perfume was finally developed. He rarely cared so much about unimportant things, and this guy actually didn't appreciate it. You don't want it? Okay, I'll give it to a Resterly. Li Yi took the porcelain bottle from his hand and threw it in the direction of the door. What is this? Ruidu. Mingsu reached out and took it. As soon as she unscrewed the lid, a faint fragrance escaped. She was surprised. The liquid in this bottle didn't have the refreshing smell of Ruidu. Instead, it had a faint fragrance. It wasn't as pungent as the fragrance of the perfume bag, but it seemed to be more suitable for women. It's not Ruidu. Li Xian's nose didn't have any problems. Naturally, he smelled the fragrance. He couldn't help but regret that he was too anxious just now. He should have opened it first to confirm. Mingsu, this. He said and turned to look at Li Yi. He asked, what is this called? Perfume. Li Yi said lazily. Yes, perfume. I intend to give this perfume to my mother. It's her birthday in 2 days. You see, this perfume was given to me by Count Resterly. If you want it, you can ask him again. Mingsu glanced at him and put away the small porcelain bottle. She turned around and left without giving him a second chance to speak. I was wrong just now. Li Xian turned back and looked at Li Yi with a smile. He said, "That bottle of perfume was taken away by Mingsu. Give me a few more bottles." "What perfume?" Li Yi looked up at him and asked with a puzzled face. Chapter 159. A sin committed by heaven could be forgiven, but a sin committed by oneself could not be avoided. Looking at Li Yi's confused face, as if he had amnesia and had completely forgotten what perfume was, Li Xian's mouth couldn't help but twitch. 10 taels of silver? Li Xian asked tentatively. Li Yi glanced at him and didn't seem to be moved. In the past, when his family was so poor that they didn't even have food to eat, 10 taels of silver was a huge sum of money for him. He didn't have to worry about food anymore. But now, he didn't know how many 10 taels of silver came into his account every day. He didn't have to bow down for this bit of money. Seeing that his amnesia hadn't recovered, Li Xian gritted his teeth and said, "I found a fine horse recently. I'll give it to you. 2 bottles at most, no more." Li Yi looked at him and finally spoke. He often traveled between the stockade and the prefectural city. It wasn't a good idea to always rent a carriage from a carriage shop. It was time to have Li Xian give him a horse. Just because he said a few words, he lost a good horse worth several hundred taels of silver. Li Xian felt depressed. After leaving behind an invitation, he took the 2 bottles of perfume and left gloomily. 2 days later, Wang Fei's birthday banquet. Li Yi opened the invitation, glanced at it, and put it to the side. Although he wasn't interested in Wang Fei's birthday banquet, since Li Xian had already sent an invitation, it wouldn't be good to embarrass him. At most, he would get a free meal and leave after he was full. Ning Wangfu was of such high class, there shouldn't be a lack of delicacies. Speaking of which, he really didn't know what the nobles of the imperial family usually ate. Thinking of this, the unwillingness in his heart lessened a little. It was just that Li Xian was too stingy and only gave 1 invitation. Otherwise, if a few more people went, they could at least earn back the cost. Li Xian was quite free. Whether it was the portrait or the perfume, he had personally made them. He just had to wait for the goods. Extorting a horse from him was a light punishment. The location of the Wang Fei's birthday banquet was, of course, Ning Wangfu. Li Yi might not be familiar with the route, but he had been dragged here by Li Xian last time, so he knew the way. Ning Wangfu's status was high. They had to give Ning Wang face. For Wang Fei's birthday banquet, there naturally wouldn't be a lack of guests. Those who had come were all prominent figures in Qing and Fu. There were civil and military officials, and even many people from the capital had come. From afar, Li Yi could see Steward Wang standing at the door, welcoming every guest with a smile. At the same time, he checked their invitations, accepted their gifts, and recorded them in the register. Keep your eyes open later. We only recognize the invitation card and not the person. No matter who comes, we can't let him in without an invitation card. Taking advantage of the free time, Steward Wang lectured the few servants at the door who welcomed the guests. Wang Fei's birthday banquet was a major event. Tonight, there were many important people in the Wangfu. Other than the high officials and nobles from the prefectural city and the capital, there were also the new scholars from Qing and Fu who had passed the imperial examinations. Wang Fei's birthday banquet was one of them. Inviting people of insight to discuss state affairs was also the highlight of the night. The welcoming area at the door was a very important part. If something went wrong, no one would be able to bear the responsibility. Hearing Steward Wang's lecture, the servants hurriedly agreed. Recently, Steward Wang had been in the limelight. There was hope that after the old steward retired, he would become the #1 candidate to be the head steward of the Wangfu. "Oh, Li, you're finally here. The young prince has been waiting for a long time." When Steward Wang saw Li Yi walk over from afar, the smile on his face grew wider and he hurriedly ran over. This time, his welcome to Li Yi came from the bottom of his heart. The business of Rui's nectar had brought in huge profits for the Wang Fu. The strong liquor that had just been released had caused many wine lovers to fight over it. It was even more popular than Rui's nectar. Just the profits from the past few days were enough to make Steward Wang smile from ear to ear. These few days, Steward Wang seemed to see mountains of gold and silver crashing down on him. Even the prince praised the strong liquor and praised him in front of everyone. These few days, Steward Wang was even floating when he walked. He had originally thought that he could only be a small steward for foreign affairs in this life. It was Li Yi who brought him hope. If it wasn't for the fact that he saw that the young prince had a close relationship with him, Steward Wang would have wanted to make a blood oath with him and become sworn brothers. Although Steward Wang had been just as warm and courteous when he came, he had never seen him so enthusiastic. When the servants in charge of welcoming the guests saw this, they couldn't help but be surprised. The guests who had just presented their gifts and had not yet stepped into the door also turned to look at this scene. They were also surprised. This person was so young, but the steward of the Wang Fu was so polite to him. Could it be that he was also a big shot? Steward Wang, long time no see. Li Yi smiled and cupped one hand and the other before his chest. He handed over something in his hand. After thinking about it, he felt that there was no good gift to give. If he gave something more expensive, the Wang Fu didn't lack it, and he was reluctant to buy it. If he gave something novel, he was afraid that it would steal Li Xian's limelight. Of course, the main reason was that he was too lazy to think about it. It was better to write this congratulatory speech in person, which was full of sincerity and not conventional. A congratulatory speech could be finished in an hour. It took some time for the ink to dry. He casually found a shop to frame it and brought it here to Freeload, to attend the birthday banquet of the Wang Fu. "Sir, please show me your invitation." A person hurried over and took the thing from Li Yi's hand. He said with a smile, "You insensible thing. Go away. Does Li need an invitation?" Steward Wang reprimanded the servant with a sullen face. Then he looked at Li Yi and said with a smile, "Li, I will take you in." The little prince said that as long as you come, I will take you to him immediately. Seeing Steward Wang take the young man in, the servant who was reprimanded was confused. Didn't Steward Wang say that no matter who came, he must show the invitation? Didn't he say that only the invitation would be recognized and not the person? Tonight, the Wang Fu was very lively. Along the way, Li Yi saw many men and women dressed in gorgeous clothes talking and laughing at the table in the courtyard. There were many Confucian scholars and scholars with extraordinary temperament. In the open space next to them, there was a singer singing with a mellow voice. This atmosphere was somewhat similar to the poetry meeting that he attended. Perhaps the banquets of the ancient people all liked this style. After following Steward Wang and turning left and right, they went deep into the Wang Fu. Gradually, the voices became smaller. Chapter 160. When he saw Li Xian again, he was in his room, staring at a kite in a daze. It was the princess's birthday, and the crown prince was hiding in his room watching a kite at night. No matter how he thought about it, it was not normal. When he saw Li Yi, his eyes lit up. He grabbed the kite and stood up, saying, "Today, I carried a heavy weight on this kite and threw it from the roof. It was like a falling leaf, very slow. If I made this kite bigger, it could naturally carry more weight. If I made it bigger, wouldn't it be able to carry a person from the sky?" After listening to his words, Li Yi felt that as a second generation, he was really burying his talent. If he could give him a little more inspiration, he was afraid that on the other side of the ocean in the future, when Galileo discovered the law of free fall, Newton discovered the law of universal gravitation, and the Wright brothers invented the airplane, he would not be praised by people but scolded as a shameless plagiarist dog. Of course, the premise was that there would still be such people in this world. In theory, people can fly into the sky, Li Yi said as he looked at him. This sentence undoubtedly brought light to Li Xian's world and illuminated his entire life. He had been thinking about these things recently, but he could not verify them. He could not make a big kite for the guards of the prince's mansion to carry and jump off the cliff. Li Yi's affirmative answer made his heart feel at ease. Next, he only needed to do what he had been doing these days and slowly advance toward his goal. One day, he would realize what he wanted in his heart. In this period of time, in Li Xian's eyes, the whole world had already undergone earth-shaking changes. He had never been to the seaside, but he had sent people to ask experienced boatmen. He knew that when standing on the seaside and looking at the sea, when a ship sailed from afar, one would first see the mast and then the hull. This confirmed what Li Yi had said. The ground under their feet was not flat, it was like a silk ball. The idea that he had just put forward was also something that he had slowly pushed forward over the past few days. He imagined that one day, humans could fly in the sky like birds. What kind of situation would that be? Of course, these things couldn't be accomplished overnight. They needed to be realized slowly. Shaking his head, he tossed these thoughts to the back of his mind and said, "Let's go for a walk outside." Li Xian could be considered half a master of the prince's mansion. Among the guests tonight, there were many who knew him. Seeing him and a stranger appear together, the two seemed to be quite friendly. When he was about to raise his head to greet them, the other had already walked past him. He stood there awkwardly with his mouth half open, but his heart was full of doubt. He had long known that Prince Ning's crown prince did not stick to a pattern, and now it seemed that the rumors were true. He just didn't know what kind of person that young man was, that he could make Prince Ning personally accompany him. As the main characters of the night, Ning Wang and Ning Wang Fei were of noble status. Naturally, they wouldn't show their faces outside at all times. Only some important guests were qualified for them to personally accompany them. At this time, in a brightly lit hall, there were a few figures. Sitting on the main seat was a graceful and noble woman. She smiled and said, "A few days ago, Yan Fei personally returned to the palace from Qinghai province and brought back a strange item called Rui Du. His Majesty greatly praised it and has included it as a tribute. I just didn't think that this Rui Du would come from the prince's mansion. If Jijia likes it, then when you return to the palace this time, bring some back." Ning Wang and Ning Wang Fei sat on either side of her. The one who spoke was Ning Wang Fei. "Then thank you, sister. When His Majesty reads memorials, he can't do without this item," the noble woman said with a smile. Even though this was Ning Wang Fu, Ning Wang and Ning Wang Fei were very polite to this woman. It was because of her special identity that even they hadn't thought that she would come to this birthday celebration without a notice. Walking with Li Xian would always attract a crowd of onlookers. Li Yi found an excuse to send him away. He strolled around alone for a while and tasted the food that the prince's mansion used to entertain guests. He felt slightly disappointed. The so-called food was only so-so. It was far from what he had hoped for. "You brat, what are you doing here?" An extremely surprised and shocked voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Li Yi stilled and turned his head. He saw Professor Feng, who he had seen that day, pointing at him with an angry expression. This voice was too sudden, and the surrounding people were also startled. Their gazes involuntarily turned in that direction. Professor Feng was very famous in Qinghai province, especially to the students. There were many people who had been taught by him. They were all curious who could have made Professor Feng so angry. Li Yi was almost scared out of his wits. He had no enmity with Professor Feng, but looking at him like this, it was as if he had sullied Professor Feng's daughter's chastity and his father-in-law was coming to settle the score. It would be strange if others did not misunderstand. Professor Feng, what is the meaning of this? Li Yi turned to look at him. Brat, didn't you say that you had a strange illness since you were young? Every time you thought about taking the scholarly exams, you would be bedridden and fall ill. Why is it that after becoming a county lieutenant, you look more energetic? Every time Professor Feng thought of the lies he had made up that day and how he had foolishly believed them, he would feel a sense of shame in his heart. After teaching so many students for so many years, even if it was a scholar, they would have to be respectful to him. He had actually been fooled by an elementary scholar. After so long, he still couldn't swallow this anger. When he heard from Prefectural Magistrate Dong that this fellow was already the county lieutenant of Anxi province, his heart was even more depressed. Li Yi looked at him with some dissatisfaction. As a dignified prefectural school's professor, every time he opened his mouth, he would call him a brat. Where was his manners? It seemed like this Professor Feng had spent so many years studying the sage's books in vain. If he had the ability, he should have asked the current emperor about the matter of him becoming a county lieutenant. Why was he venting his anger in front of him? Did he think that he was willing? I've already said that it's a strange illness. Who knows when it will get better? Maybe this position of county lieutenant is a good medicine. Li Yi said lazily. He picked up a plate of pastries and walked past Professor Feng. He didn't want to be called a brat by this Professor Feng again. Even though the other party's rank was higher than his, could a city's education bureau director control a county's public security bureau director? Obviously not, since that was the case, there was no need to bother with him anymore. Incurable, incurable. Professor Feng watched as the scholar left indifferently after being ignored. He waved his sleeves and said angrily. As for those officials who had been reprimanded by Professor Feng, they looked at Li Yi's back with a little respect. After so many years, this was the first time they saw a student who dared to speak to Professor Feng in such a manner. Respect, respect, you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.